What's up everyone? You're here at The Fiction Wizard. We're dropping something epic today. Amelia Bones arrived at Privet Drive with 9 Aurors. Dumbledore was named on every page. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1, The Letter. The letter took Harry 3 days to write. Not because he didn't know what to say. He'd known what to say for years, actually. The words had been sitting at the back of his throat like stones since he was old enough to understand that the way the Dursleys treated him wasn't something that happened in normal houses. The problem was that every time he'd ever tried to say any of it, there'd been a reason not to. Dumbledore's reassuring half-explanations. Hagrid's well-meaning deflections. The vague, enormous pressure of being told, in 100 different ways, that the important thing was Voldemort, that the important thing was the war, that the important thing was everything except Harry himself. After Cedric, he'd run out of patience for that. He sat at the desk in Dudley's second bedroom, his bedroom, technically, though it had taken 4 years and he still sometimes forgot, with parchment unrolled in front of him and a quill he'd already snapped in half once from pressing too hard. Outside, Privet Drive hummed with the particular sound of a July evening, lawnmowers, a distant radio, someone's dog losing its mind about something. Normal. Aggressively, exhaustingly normal. He wrote, to whom it may concern, at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Then he stopped and stared at it for a long time. The thing was, he'd tried other routes. He'd told Ron and Hermione bits and pieces over the years, and they'd been sympathetic in the vague way of people who'd never missed a meal, who had bedrooms full of their own things, who went home at Christmas to houses that were glad to have them. He didn't blame them. But sympathy from people who couldn't do anything wasn't the same as help. He'd told no one else, because there was no one else. Dumbledore's response to everything Harry had ever tried to raise about the Dursleys had been the same patient, slightly sorrowful expression and the same 3 words, they are family. As if that word, family, was an explanation that covered everything, including the cupboard under the stairs, including the bars on his window, including the fact that for the first 2 weeks of every summer he was given approximately enough food to keep a medium-sized cat alive. He wasn't writing this letter to be saved. He'd given up on that particular fantasy somewhere around age 9. He was writing it because Cedric Diggory was dead, and when Harry had come back with the body and tried to tell people what had happened, the Ministry's response had been to send someone to discredit him in the press. And somewhere between that and the Dursleys picking him up from King's Cross in absolute silence, not even Aunt Petunia's thin, performative civility, just silence, Harry had understood something. The people who were supposed to protect him were operating on the assumption that he would always absorb the damage and keep going. That he would keep being useful and keep being quiet, and they could keep making decisions about his life without consulting him because he'd never done anything except what he was told. He was done being told. So he wrote it all down. He started from the beginning, because the beginning mattered, not the famous beginning with Voldemort and the green light and the scar, but the actual beginning of his conscious life, which was the cupboard under the stairs. The lock on the outside. The way it smelled like dust and old trainers and something he couldn't name until much later that he finally identified as the specific quality of being forgotten. He wrote about not having enough food. He wrote about Dudley's hand-me-down clothes 3 sizes too large and the understanding that he was not supposed to do better at school than Dudley regardless of what it cost him. He wrote about the summer before second year when they'd put bars on his window and a cat flap on his door for food, and Uncle Vernon's face when he'd said it, which had been so entirely devoid of guilt that it had been almost impressive. He wrote about the summer before third year when he hadn't been told about Sirius Black being loose and had consequently spent 6 weeks in a house where the adults already thought he was dangerous enough to need containing. He wrote about Dumbledore. Specifically, he wrote about Dumbledore's name on the guardianship paperwork. He'd seen it once, in a moment of administrative confusion during his second year, and hadn't understood what it meant at the time. He understood now. It meant that someone in the magical world had made a legal decision to place Harry with the Dursleys, and that person was Albus Dumbledore, and that person had known about the cat flap and the bars on the window and the cupboard and had never once intervened in any concrete way. He didn't write it with rage. He wrote it the way you write something that you've thought about so many times it's worn smooth, like a stone in a river. Factual. Specific. Dated where he could remember dates. It came to 9 pages. He read it back once, made 3 small corrections, and sent it with Hedwig before he could change his mind, addressed to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, attention the head of department. He didn't know who the head of department was. He found he didn't much care. Someone would read it. Then he went downstairs and ate the toast that Aunt Petunia had left out, 1 slice, no butter, and sat in the kitchen while Uncle Vernon read the paper and breathed through his nose loudly, and Harry looked out the window at the garden and felt, very strangely, like he'd just put something down that he'd been carrying for a very long time. Amelia Bones read the letter on a Thursday morning, which was otherwise an unremarkable Thursday. She had 3 departmental memos on her desk, a disciplinary hearing scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and a stack of incident reports from the ongoing investigation into the graveyard attack that had killed Cedric Diggory, an investigation that Fudge was doing his considerable best to obstruct by the simple method of refusing to officially acknowledge that there was anything to investigate. Her assistant knocked at 8:20. Post came. 1 flagged for your personal attention, came in on the special route. The what? Someone sent it Muggle post. Written on magical parchment, sealed with a wax seal, dropped in a post box in. Her assistant consulted a small slip of paper, Surrey. The charms on it flagged it for the head of department. Amelia took the letter. The handwriting on the outside was a teenager's handwriting, slightly too large, slightly uneven, the kind that hadn't quite decided what it wanted to be yet. The return address was a number on Privet Drive, Little Whinging. She opened it. She read it through once quickly, the way she read everything first, for the shape of it, the overall impression. Then she went back to the beginning and read it again, slowly, and this time she made notes. By the time she finished, she had filled 2/3 of a legal pad. She sat for a moment with the letter in one hand and her pen in the other and looked at her office wall, which had a framed copy of the Wizarding Charter of Rights on it, because she'd put it there 15 years ago when she'd taken this job as a reminder of what the job was actually for. Then she picked up her wand and tapped her interdepartmental messaging stone. Scrimgeour. In my office. Now. Rufus Scrimgeour arrived looking, as he always did, like a man who expected to be interrupted in the middle of something important. He was head of the Auror office, technically her subordinate in organizational terms, though he had a gift for making that feel debatable. He was good at his job and she respected that about him, but he had a frustrating tendency to look at problems and see only the tactical dimension. "Read this," she said, and handed him the letter. He read it standing up. His expression didn't change. Scrimgeour's expressions rarely did, which was part of why he was good at his job, but she watched his eyes slow down on page 5, and again on page 7, and she knew exactly which parts he was rereading. He set it down on her desk. Potter. Yes. Sent this by Muggle post. Yes. To our department. To the head of department, which is me, yes. She let the implication sit there for a second. He sent it by Muggle post because he was presumably worried that Standard Owl post might be intercepted. He's 14 years old and he was worried about his mail being intercepted. That's either paranoia, she paused. Or it's not. Scrimgeour picked up the letter again. Looked at page 8, where Harry had written about the guardianship paperwork in Dumbledore's name. This could be a fabrication. It could. That's why we're going to go and find out. He looked at her. Amelia. This is Dumbledore. I'm aware. If this letter ends up being nothing, and we've gone charging into a Muggle neighborhood on the basis of a teenager's complaint against the Chief Warlock, then we'll look briefly foolish and we'll move on. She stood, which tended to end discussions. She was not a tall woman, but she had the quality of filling a room. Get me 9 Aurors. I want experienced people. I don't want anyone who's going to lose their head if this gets complicated. Full investigative authority under the child welfare provisions of the 1973 Magical Persons Act. Ministry transport. We leave at 10:09? He raised an eyebrow. For a welfare check? For Harry Potter. She met his eyes steadily. Who survived Voldemort at 14 months old, who survived the Chamber of Secrets, who survived the Triwizard Tournament, and who someone has been keeping in a house in Surrey for 14 years without anyone in this department so much as doing a welfare visit. She picked up her notepad. 9 Aurors. 10 o'clock. Scrimgeour left without arguing further. That was another thing she respected about him. She sent 2 other messages before 10. One to the Wisengamot's administrative office, requesting the original guardianship documentation for Harry James Potter, minor, placed in Muggle care approximately November 1, 1981. The response came back in 11 minutes. The records existed, they were sealed under Dumbledore's personal authority, and access required either Dumbledore's direct consent or a legal warrant issued by the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She was, as it happened, exactly that person. The second message went to the Hogwarts archives, requesting Harry Potter's medical records from the school nurse. She put on her coat, picked up her bag, and went downstairs to where 9 Aurors were waiting. Number 4, Privet Drive was exactly what the letter had described. It wasn't a bad house in any obvious way, that was almost the worst thing about it. It was a perfectly ordinary house on a perfectly ordinary street, with a small garden that somebody kept very neat and net curtains in the front windows and a car in the drive that was slightly too large for the neighborhood in the way that suggested someone was working very hard at the appearance of success. Amelia stood on the pavement for a moment and looked at it. Then she walked up the path and knocked on the door. She heard movement inside, the particular shuffling and whispering of a household surprised by a knock, and then the door opened. The man who opened it was large. Not tall, particularly, but wide, with a red face and very small eyes that moved from Amelia to the 9 Aurors behind her and back again with a speed that was impressive for eyes that small. He was wearing a shirt with a tie, which suggested he'd either just come home or had been sitting at home in a tie for reasons of his own. "Mr. Dursley," Amelia said. "My name is Amelia Bones. I'm the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the Ministry of Magic. I have a warrant to enter this property and speak with your ward, Harry Potter." Vernon Dursley stared at her. His face went, in rapid succession, through the colors of a traffic light, red, then a purplish red, then something approaching normal. You people aren't supposed to, I have a warrant, Amelia said again, pleasantly. Which means the question of what I'm supposed to do has been answered by a court of law. May I come in? She stepped forward slightly as she said it, not aggressively, but with the calm confidence of a woman who fully expected to be let in and was merely performing the social courtesy of asking first. Dursley stepped back. She noted that he stepped back not from the 9 Aurors, who were fanned out behind her in their ministry robes, but from the rolled document she was holding. Interesting. The man recognized legal instruments. The inside of the house was very clean. Aggressively clean, in a way that spoke less of comfort than of performance, everything in its place, nothing personal on the surfaces, the living room visible through an open door to the right with its very large television and its very new-looking sofa where a large boy sat watching something and pointedly not acknowledging them. A woman appeared at the kitchen door, thin, with a long neck and an expression like she'd bitten into something she hadn't expected. She took one look at the Aurors and her hand went to her mouth. "Where is Harry?" Amelia asked. "He's upstairs." The woman, Petunia presumably, gestured vaguely toward the staircase. "He's in his room. He hasn't done anything, we haven't, he's perfectly fine, he's excellent. We'll speak with him there, if it's all the same to you." She turned to the Auror on her left, Tonks, who she'd specifically requested because Tonks had the unusual quality of being perceptive without being threatening, and also because she had excellent instincts. "Tonks. Come with me. The rest of you, Hestia, I want a full inventory of the property consistent with the warrant. Johnson, Meadows, stay with Mr. and Mrs. Dursley and the boy. She went upstairs. There were 2 bedrooms on the upper left, one large and clearly Dudley's based on the noise coming from inside it, more television, more electronics, and one smaller door at the end of the hall with, she noticed, a series of locks on the outside. 3 locks, in fact. For a child's bedroom. She looked at them for a moment, then at Tonks, who was looking at them with an expression that had gone very quiet in a specific way. She knocked. A beat of silence. Then, yeah? Harry? My name is Amelia Bones. I'm from the ministry. May I come in? Another beat. Longer this time. She had the impression of someone on the other side of the door running through possibilities very quickly, the way you did when you've been expecting something to go wrong. Yeah, he said again. It's not locked. She opened the door. The room was small. Not offensively small, not a cupboard, but small for a bedroom, with a desk under the window and a narrow bed and a birdcage on the wardrobe that held a white owl who regarded Amelia with immediate, intelligent suspicion. There was a trunk at the foot of the bed. The walls were bare except for one postcard, Edinburgh, from the looks of it, probably sent by someone at school, pinned at an odd angle above the desk. Harry Potter was sitting at the desk. He'd turned to face the door when she came in, and she looked at him, really looked at him, the way she looked at people when she was trying to understand a situation. He was thin. Noticeably, specifically thin, in the way that wasn't just teenage boy lanky but pointed, like someone who didn't reliably get enough food. His glasses were slightly too large for his face, the wire frame bent on one side as if they'd been stepped on and rebent. He was wearing a t-shirt that could have fit someone twice his size. She thought about page 2 of his letter, where he'd written about hand-me-down clothes. She thought about the fact that his cousin was visible in the living room, and his cousin was roughly twice Harry's size in every dimension, and the clothes he was wearing fit his cousin's dimensions, not his own. She kept her face neutral. It was important to keep her face neutral right now. Harry, she said. I received your letter. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face shifted, the particular shift of someone who'd been braced for a specific kind of response and had gotten a different one instead. You actually read it. Every page. She pulled out her legal pad. I have some questions, if you're up for it. You don't have to answer anything, you're allowed to have legal representation present if you want it, and you can tell me to stop at any point. Do you understand that? He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was more like the cautious, analytical look of someone doing rapid mental calculations about whether something was real. Yeah, he said. I understand. She sat down on the end of his bed, because there was nowhere else to sit and because she wanted to be at eye level with him rather than standing over him. Tonks settled against the wall by the door with her arms crossed, doing her impressive impression of not being there. In your letter, Amelia began, you described a period during the summer before your second year when there were locks and bars installed on this room. Bars on the window, he said immediately. 3 locks on the door, the locks were already there from before. The bars were added that summer. He said it with no particular emotion, which was somehow worse than if he'd been upset. They took them down before I started term. I think they were worried about someone seeing. And you mentioned a cat flap. He turned and pointed at the bottom of his door, and Amelia turned to look, and there it was, a small rectangular panel cut into the bottom of the door, currently not installed but the rectangular outline of where it had been was still visible in the wood around the hole that had been somewhat messily patched over. She looked at Tonks. Tonks looked at the door. Tonks's face was doing something complicated. It was for food, Harry said. So they could put food through without unlocking the door. Amelia wrote something on her pad. Were you locked in the room regularly? In summer. Not during term. He paused. I was in the cupboard under the stairs before my Hogwarts letter came. They moved me up here then. She kept her voice very even. How long did you live in the cupboard? He considered this. He looked like he was actually thinking about it, calculating back through years, which meant he'd been in there long enough that the years blurred. From when I was little. Maybe 3. 4. Until I was 11. Tonks made a sound. Amelia didn't look at her. The letter mentioned that Albus Dumbledore's name appeared on guardianship paperwork, Amelia said. Can you tell me about that? Harry's expression did something interesting there. It got more alert, the way it did when you hit the thing someone had been waiting to talk about. Second year. There was some confusion in the school records. Someone in administration had the wrong file out, I think, and I saw it. It was the guardianship placement record. Standard ministry form, the kind that names a responsible magical party for a wizard minor placed in non-magical care. Dumbledore's name was on it as the placing authority. He met her eyes. Which means he knew where I was. Which means he could have, he stopped. Which means he could have checked, Amelia said. Yeah. She wrote for a moment. Outside, she could hear one of her Aurors moving through the property, the quiet, methodical sound of an inventory being conducted. Downstairs, Dursley's voice had started up, low and controlled, angry, the way men like him got when they felt their authority being questioned without enough provocation to give them an excuse to actually shout. Harry, she said carefully, I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel absolutely no pressure to give a particular answer. I'm asking because I need to understand the full picture. She looked at him steadily. Were you ever physically harmed in this house? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to lie, but the quiet of someone who was genuinely deciding how to characterize something. Not, the way you mean, probably. Vernon grabbed me a few times. Threw me into a wall once, but I think that was, he lost his temper. He's never hit me, if that's what you're asking. What about your cousin? Something that was almost a smile crossed his face, quick and dry. Dudley hit me plenty of times. We were kids, though. Last couple years he's mostly stopped. I think he's a bit worried about what I might do back. And food? The almost smile faded. They're careful about it. There's always enough to say there was food. Just not always enough to, he stopped again, searching for a phrasing. They eat normally. I eat what's left. Amelia put her pen down for a moment and looked at him. He met her look without flinching, which said something about him, about the kind of composure you developed when you'd learned very young that showing vulnerability was something people used against you. Okay, she said. I have enough for now. I need to ask you one more thing, and I want you to answer this as simply and honestly as you can. She paused. Would you like to leave this house? Something happened in his face that he didn't quite manage to control. It was brief, just a second, a flicker, but she saw it. It looked like relief so profound it had forgotten how to be expressed. Yes, he said. Yeah. I'd like that. Downstairs was a different conversation. Vernon Dursley had moved from controlled angry through blustering and was now in the territory of attempting a specific kind of middle-class dignity that relied on the other party being embarrassed on his behalf. It wasn't working. The Aurors stood in his living room with their clipboards and their wands and their complete immunity to embarrassment, and Hestia Jones looked up from her inventory notes with the expression of a woman who had been in far more alarming places than this. Amelia came down the stairs and walked into the living room and stood in front of Vernon Dursley, and he drew himself up. This is completely outrageous, he said. He had a voice that was used to being the largest voice in a room, the voice of someone who had learned that volume was a form of authority. You people have no right to be here, you have no, I have a warrant, Amelia said. That's a legal document. It means I do, in fact, have the right. She opened her notepad. Mr. Dursley. The lock's on Harry Potter's bedroom door. When were they installed? He blinked. I don't, those locks have been there for 3 locks, she said. A standard mortise lock, a padlock hasp, and a bolt with a slide. All operable only from the outside. I'd like to know when they were installed. He was always, there were safety concerns. What safety concerns require 3 external locks on a child's bedroom? Dudley, from the sofa, had stopped watching television. He was watching Amelia instead, with the uncertain expression of a boy who was used to being very sure of the social hierarchy and was no longer certain where things stood. He's not normal. Dursley's face had gone the traffic light red again. The things he can do, you don't know what it's like, living with. I know exactly what it's like to live with magical ability, Amelia said, very quietly. I've done it all my life. And in my experience, the appropriate response is not 3 external locks. She turned to Petunia, who was standing in the kitchen doorway again, one hand pressed to her collarbone like she was holding something in. Mrs. Dursley. The cat flap in Harry's door. The rectangular panel at the bottom. That hole was patched over recently, but it's visible. Can you tell me when it was installed and why? Petunia's jaw worked. That was Albus Dumbledore. Her voice dropped on the name like she was handling something dangerous. He was the one who arranged everything. We only did what we were told, that the boy needed to be here. We were told it was for safety. We didn't ask for any of this. You didn't ask for any of this, Amelia repeated. We never wanted, we took him in, we gave him a home, a room, Amelia said. Before that, a cupboard. She watched Petunia's face go very still. I've spoken with Harry. He's described his living arrangements in considerable detail. I've also taken photographs of the door and the window surround where the bars were fitted and removed, and I have those photographs. She looked between them both. I'm going to be very straightforward with you, because I think you're the kind of people who respond better to straightforward than to implication. What's happened in this house constitutes neglect under both Muggle and magical child welfare law. The specific circumstances of Harry's placement here, who decided it, who approved it, who had oversight responsibility, are a matter for a separate investigation that's already been opened. Your own responsibility is not thereby reduced, but it is complicated by the question of what you were told and by whom. She let that sit for a moment. Harry will be leaving with me today, she continued. He will not be returning to this property. If you attempt to contest that, you will need to obtain legal representation, and I will see you in the Wisengamot. If you cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation, including providing sworn testimony about any instructions or communications you received regarding Harry's placement and treatment here, that cooperation will be noted in the record. She closed her notepad. Any questions? Vernon Dursley looked at her. His mouth opened. Then it closed. He sat down, very suddenly, on the sofa beside his son, and he looked, Amelia noted this, filed it away, found it neither satisfying nor unsatisfying, like a man who had just discovered that the world he'd been confident about was slightly different from the one he'd assumed. Petunia didn't say anything. She turned around and went back into the kitchen, and a moment later Amelia heard the sound of a kettle being filled, which was as English a response to crisis as she'd ever witnessed. Harry came downstairs with his trunk levitated behind him and Hedwig's cage in his hand, and he walked through the hallway without looking at his aunt and uncle, and he pushed open the front door and stepped out into the afternoon sun, and Amelia watched him stop for a moment on the front step and just stand there. Breathing. Looking at Privet Drive with the expression of someone checking that it was still real. Tonks appeared at Amelia's elbow. Car's ready, she said quietly. And for what it's worth, she paused. My mum's Andromeda Black. Disowned. I grew up knowing what it looked like when a kid came out of a bad situation. She glanced at Harry. He's been very calm in there. Yes, Amelia said. The very calm ones are the ones who've had the longest time to get used to it. I know. She moved toward the door. That's rather the point. She stepped out onto Privet Drive and walked toward where Harry was standing, and she stood beside him, and together they looked at Number 4 for a moment, its neat garden, its net curtains, its aggressive normalcy, and then she turned to him. "Ready?" she said. Harry Potter looked at her. He looked at the Aurors. He looked at his owl, who was regarding him with what appeared to be approval. He looked back at the house one more time, and whatever he saw there seemed to settle something in him, because the tension in his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "Yeah," he said. "I've been ready for a while." They walked down the path, and a ministry car that had no business fitting 11 people but did anyway pulled up to the curb, and Harry Potter got in and did not look back. Amelia got in beside him, opened her notepad, and at the top of a fresh page wrote, "Dumbledore, guardianship documentation, warrant pending." She underlined it twice. On the seat between them, Harry's owl rustled her feathers and settled, apparently satisfied with proceedings. "Hedwig likes you," Harry said, sounding slightly surprised. Amelia looked at the owl, who looked back at her with round amber eyes. "She has good judgment," she said. Harry almost smiled. It was a small thing, crooked and quick, like something that hadn't quite remembered how to work yet. Amelia thought, give it time. She turned back to her notepad, and the car pulled away from Privet Drive, and behind them Number 4 sat in the afternoon light looking exactly as it always had, quiet and clean and perfectly, terribly ordinary. Chapter 2, named on every page. The ministry car didn't go to the ministry. Harry noticed this after about 10 minutes, when the motorway sign stopped pointing toward London and started pointing toward somewhere he didn't recognize. He didn't say anything immediately. He'd spent enough years in this particular mental posture, the one where you noticed something was wrong and calculated whether asking about it would make things worse, that it was practically automatic. But then he thought, no. He'd written 9 pages specifically so he could stop doing that. "Where are we going?" he asked. Amelia looked up from her notepad. "Safe house," she said. "Ministry maintained property in Wiltshire. You'll be there temporarily while the legal situation is arranged." "What legal situation?" She looked at him properly then, with the evaluating look he was beginning to recognize, the one that seemed to be checking whether he could handle a straight answer. Apparently he kept passing, because she gave him one. "The guardianship paperwork needs to be formally challenged before a Wisengamot panel, which means I need to file a petition, which means I need the original documents, which have been sealed under Dumbledore's personal authority." She tapped her pen against the notepad. "I've already requested a warrant. It should be on my desk by the time we arrive. And if it's not? Then I'll request it again. And if that doesn't work, I'll walk into the administrative office personally and stand there until someone processes it." She said it with the complete lack of drama of someone describing what they'd have for breakfast. "I'm very good at standing in places until things happen." In the front seat, Tonks made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The Auror beside her, a square-jawed man Harry didn't know named Savage, apparently, stared straight ahead with the expression of someone who had learned not to react to anything. Harry looked out the window. The motorway was doing its motorway thing, grey and flat and absolutely featureless, and the normalcy of it felt strange against the extraordinary fact of the last 2 hours. He'd written the letter. He'd gone to sleep. He'd woken up and eaten his single piece of toast, and then 9 Aurors had appeared at the front door, and now he was in a ministry car going somewhere, and Aunt Petunia was in her kitchen making tea for no one, and Uncle Vernon was sitting on the sofa looking like his world had developed a crack in it. He was surprised to find that he didn't feel triumphant about that. He didn't feel much of anything about it, actually. Just a quiet, flat sort of finality. Like closing a book. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask me anything," Amelia said. "I'll tell you if I can't answer." "When you read the letter." "What?" He stopped and rearranged the question. "What specifically made you come today?" "Like, today." "Not in a week. Not after more paperwork." She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of avoiding the question, but the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be, and then deciding to be very honest. "Because you sent it by Muggle post," she said. A 14-year-old wizard who was worried about his correspondence being intercepted used Muggle infrastructure to contact the Ministry. That's not paranoia. That's rational calculation based on experience. She paused. And because in 15 years of running that department, no one has sent us a 9-page letter about Harry Potter's living arrangements. Which means either no one knew, or no one thought it was their problem. She looked at him with those steady, serious eyes. Both of those possibilities concerned me considerably. Harry thought about that. "It's both," he said. "Most people didn't know. And the ones who did thought it was justified. Or necessary. Or," he searched for the phrasing Dumbledore had used once, in the vague, regretful way he had of saying things that sounded like explanations but weren't. "Painful but required." "Painful but required," Amelia repeated. She wrote something on her pad. "He does that," Harry said. "He talks like every terrible thing is a tragedy he's just witnessing. Like he's not the one deciding it." The car was quiet for a moment. "Yes," Amelia said. "I've noticed that about him." The safe house in Wiltshire was nothing like Privet Drive, which was either a good thing or another type of disorienting. Harry hadn't decided yet. It was a converted farmhouse set back from a narrow road behind a long driveway lined with beech trees that were old enough to have opinions about it. Inside it was comfortable in an impersonal way, good furniture, clean, stocked kitchen, the kind of place that had been set up to house people in transit and had given up on personality in favor of function. An Auror named Proudfoot was already there when they arrived, which meant someone had come ahead to set the wards. He nodded at Amelia with the brevity of a man who'd been briefed, glanced at Harry with the professional assessment of someone cataloging potential complications, and handed Amelia a sealed envelope. She opened it at the kitchen table while Harry sat across from her with Hedwig's cage on the chair beside him and Tonks leaning in the doorway. "Warrant," Amelia said, without evident satisfaction. She read it through carefully, flipped to the second page, read that too. "Good. They've included the supplementary request, which means we get the full guardianship file rather than just the placement record." She set it down. "I'll go into the office this afternoon." "Tonks, you'll stay here." "Obviously," Tonks said. "I'm not babysitting," Harry said. Tonks looked at him. Her hair, which had been a nondescript brown for the duration of the car journey, presumably a professional choice, shifted to a shade of bright pink so immediately that Harry blinked. "No," she agreed cheerfully. "You're definitely not. I'm the one who needs company. I hate safe houses. They're so," she gestured at the room with its functional furniture and its complete lack of any distinguishing features. "Beige." Harry looked around. The walls were, in fact, completely beige. "Yeah," he said. "That's fair." Amelia gathered her things, stood, and paused by Harry's chair. "I'll be back by evening," she said. "If you need anything, food, anything at all, Proudfoot can arrange it. If anyone contacts you, any communication at all, don't respond until I'm back." She held his eyes. Anyone. He understood what she meant by anyone. "What happens when Dumbledore finds out?" "When," she said. "Not if." "Yes." She picked up her bag. "He'll find out today, probably. Someone at the Ministry will tell him. There are people on his side in every corridor of that building, which he knows and I know, so there's no point pretending otherwise. And he'll contact you." She paused. "What you need to understand, Harry, is that whatever he says, whatever reason he gives, whatever version of the greater good he offers, he doesn't have legal standing over you anymore. Not after this morning. I've filed the emergency displacement order, which means the Dursley guardianship is suspended pending review, which means no one has formal custody of you right now except the Ministry, and I am the Ministry, in the relevant sense." She said it very calmly. So if he shows up here, or contacts you, or sends someone, you don't have to do anything, he says. Harry sat with that for a second. In 4 years of Hogwarts, no one had ever said that sentence to him. You don't have to do anything, he says. It was such a simple thing. It was such an enormous thing. Okay, he said. She left. The house settled into quiet, punctuated by Hedwig shuffling in her cage and Tonks pushing herself off the doorframe and going to investigate the kitchen with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't eaten since breakfast. Right, Tonks said, opening cupboard doors. There's pasta, there's, oh, good, someone stocked this properly, there's eggs, there's bread, there's, she turned around. Are you actually hungry or have you been trained to say you're not? Harry blinked. What? Aunt Amelia, Madam Bones, she mentioned the food situation in your letter. And I know how it works. Kid who's been underfed learns to say they're fine because asking for food got a bad response. She was watching him with a direct attention that wasn't unkind. So I'm asking. Hungry? He thought about the toast that morning. He thought about the evening before, which had been one potato and whatever was left after the Dursleys finished. He thought about how he'd gotten very practiced at not thinking about it because thinking about it made it worse. Yeah, he said. I'm hungry. Tonks turned back to the cupboards. Eggs it is. I make exceptional eggs. Sit there and tell me something about yourself that isn't about Voldemort. He almost said I don't know what that would be, which would have been true and also deeply sad, so instead he said, I'm good at Quidditch. How good? I made Seeker in first year. Youngest in a century, apparently. Show off, she said, not unkindly. She cracked an egg with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. I played Quidditch at Hogwarts. Hufflepuff. I was a beater, which, she glanced over her shoulder. You're going to make a beater joke, I can see it forming. I wasn't going to say anything, Harry said. You were absolutely going to say something about hair-related aerodynamics. He found, to his own surprise, that he was smiling. Actually smiling, the full version of it, not the careful almost smile from the car. It felt strange on his face, like a muscle that hadn't been used in a few weeks. I wasn't, he said. But I am now. Amelia got back to her office at noon and found 3 things waiting for her: the full guardianship file, a memo from Fudge's office requesting a meeting at her earliest convenience, and Rufus Scrimgeour sitting in her visitor's chair. She dealt with them in reverse order. Rufus. You took the boy, he said. I applied an emergency displacement order and removed a minor from a situation of ongoing neglect, yes. She sat down, pulled the guardianship file toward her. Would you like to argue with the legal basis for that? I'd like to discuss the political basis for it. There isn't one. That's rather the point. She opened the file. The law says what to do when a magical child is being neglected. I did it. The political consequences are the political consequences. Scrimgeour watched her read. He was very good at watching. It was one of the things that made him a good Auror, the capacity to simply observe without needing to fill silence. He's contacted the office, he said, after a moment. She looked up. Fudge? Dumbledore. She went back to the file. And? He's requested an urgent meeting. He says, Scrimgeour checked a note. That there are security implications to Harry Potter's current placement that require immediate discussion, and that he'd like the opportunity to brief you before any formal steps are taken. He paused. He was very polite about it. He's always very polite about it. Amelia. He's the chief warlock. He has the authority of his office, yes. Which doesn't include oversight of mine. She turned a page. I'll meet with him. Tomorrow. After I've read this file. She looked up again. Rufus. Look at this. She turned the file around and slid it across the desk. Scrimgeour leaned forward. He was quiet for a moment, reading. She watched his expression the way she'd watched it that morning with the letter, waiting for the slowdown, the specific moment where the full weight of something landed. It landed at about the same place. Page 4. This is the original placement order, she said. November 2nd, 1981. Harry Potter, then 15 months old, placed in the care of Vernon and Petunia Dursley at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. She stood and came around the desk to stand beside him and point. This is the assessment of suitable placement. Standard form, requires a welfare evaluation of the proposed guardians, an assessment of the child's needs, a recommendation from a qualified magical social worker. She let him look at it. Notice anything? He was quiet. Then, it's blank. Every single assessment field. Blank. She pointed to the bottom of the page. The authorizing signature. He looked. Dumbledore. Dumbledore, she agreed. No social worker assessment. No welfare evaluation. No consideration of alternative magical guardians. No Wisengamot approval, which is technically required for a Muggle placement of a magical minor. She straightened up. He placed a 15-month-old child in a Muggle household on his own authority, with no oversight and no assessment, and then sealed the records under his personal access codes. She returned to her side of the desk. He sealed them, Rufus. You seal records when you don't want them reviewed. Scrimgeour sat back slowly. She could see him doing the thing she'd done that morning, the recalibration, the slow internal reorganization of a picture you thought you understood. He had reasons, Scrimgeour said. But he said it like a question. I'm sure he did. I'd like to hear them. She picked up the memo from Fudge's office. I'd also like to know why the minister is requesting an urgent meeting before I've announced any formal action. She set it down again. Someone in this building told him what I did this morning before I got back. Leaks. Always leaks. The question is direction. She reached for her pen. All right. I'm going to need the following things. 1. A formal inventory of all ministry records referencing Harry Potter's guardianship, placement, and living conditions since 1981. Every memo, every form, every owl. 2. The names of anyone with access to those records over the same period. 3. I want Shacklebolt on the file. He's good, he's discreet, and he doesn't owe Dumbledore anything. Kingsley's currently on assignment. Pull him off it. This is more important. She started writing. And tell Fudge I'll see him at 4. Separately from Dumbledore. I want to hear the political intervention and the institutional one independently, so I can compare them. Scrimgeour stood. He picked up his robes from the back of the chair with the movement of a man who was already planning what he was going to do next. At the door he paused. For what it's worth, he said, those blank forms. I've been in this job 20 years. I've never seen a placement order like that. No, Amelia said. Neither have I. She met Fudge at 4 o'clock in the conference room on the 3rd floor, which she chose deliberately because it was her territory and not his. He arrived 2 minutes late, which was a power move that would have worked better if she'd been the kind of person who noticed lateness. Cornelius Fudge was a man who wore his anxiety like a costume. He dressed too well and smiled too readily and talked in the particular rhythm of someone who was always half listening to what effect his words were having. Today he was wearing a lime green bowler hat that she found deeply distracting but had learned years ago not to comment on. Amelia, he said, sitting down with the warmth of someone greeting an ally. Thank you for seeing me so quickly. I know how busy things are. Cornelius, she said. What can I do for you? He settled back. I've heard, and I want to be clear, I've only heard, I haven't had any formal notification from your office, which I thought was slightly, Formal notification of a departmental action will be filed at the end of today, as per standard procedure, she said. Yes, of course. But informally, he clasped his hands on the table. I've heard you've removed Harry Potter from his place of residence. Under a valid emergency displacement order, yes. In response to a letter. In response to a letter which described specific conditions consistent with the definition of neglect under the 1973 Act, yes, and which I subsequently confirmed through personal inspection of the property and interview with the minor in question. Fudge's smile didn't drop exactly, it just became less authentic, more structural. Harry Potter is a very complicated young man. Given everything that's happened this summer, the terrible accident at the Triwizard Tournament, it wasn't an accident, Amelia said. The smile stayed structural. Given the trauma he's experienced, it's possible that his account of things is colored by distress. Or by a degree of teenage. His bedroom door has 3 external locks, Cornelius. She said it very quietly. There's an outline in the wood where a cat flap was installed and subsequently removed. I have photographs of both. There's also photographic evidence of where window bars were fitted and removed on the exterior of the building. She folded her hands. Would you like to explain which of those is colored by teenage distress? He was quiet. The smile had gone entirely now. This isn't about Harry Potter's state of mind, she continued. It's about documented conditions in a property where a magical minor has been living for 13 years. The conditions are documented. The law is clear. My department's response is by the book. She held his gaze. If you have a specific legal objection to my actions, I welcome it in writing. If you're here on someone else's behalf, then I'd ask you to tell whoever sent you that they're welcome to make an appointment and make their case directly. He stood up. The smile came back, but it was the wrong kind of smile, thin and slightly brittle. I think you may find this more complicated than it appears, Amelia. There are considerations here that go beyond the standard framework. There are no considerations that go beyond the legal protection of a child, she said. That's actually the point of the framework. He left. She sat alone in the conference room for a moment after he went and breathed through her nose and looked at the wall. Then she gathered her notes and went back to her office and wrote for 2 hours without stopping. The owl arrived at the Wiltshire safe house at approximately 6 in the evening. Harry saw it before Tonks did. He was sitting by the window because the garden was nicer to look at than the beige walls, and he had a book open on his lap that he wasn't reading, and Hedwig had been doing something disapproving at him from her cage for reasons he couldn't identify, and then a large tawny owl appeared at the window with a letter and he recognized the handwriting immediately. He didn't open the window. Tonks appeared at his shoulder, looked at the owl, looked at the letter, looked at Harry. You know that owl? It's Dumbledore's. A beat. Right. She looked at the owl. The owl looked back with great equanimity. Madam Bones said don't respond until she's back. I know. Harry looked at the letter. The tawny owl tapped the glass once, patient as a professor, which was somehow the most Dumbledore thing about it. I'm not going to open it. Tonks was quiet for a moment. You sure? Because most people, when Dumbledore sends them a letter, most people haven't spent 4 years being told things were for their own good and then finding out they weren't. Harry turned away from the window. The owl tapped again, twice. He kept his back to it. He'll say whatever he thinks will work. And the thing is, he's very good at it. So I'd rather wait. There was a pause. He heard Tonks sit down somewhere behind him. Smart, she said. Not smart. Just tired. He picked up his unread book and looked at the page. I'm tired of his particular kind of sense-making. The kind where everything terrible has a good reason and you should feel better about it because the reason is so good. He paused. Cedric died because of me. Voldemort is back because of me, because of my blood. And Dumbledore's response was to send me back to the Dursleys and write me one letter in a month. He turned a page he hadn't read. I don't want to hear what he has to say about that. The owl eventually gave up and left. Neither of them commented on it. Amelia came back at 7 with a briefcase and a specific kind of controlled energy that Harry was beginning to recognize as her version of agitation, everything outwardly settled, the pace very slightly too quick. She sat down at the kitchen table and spread papers out in front of her with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting to do this. Harry moved to sit across from her. Tonks made tea without being asked, which Harry was starting to realize was her way of signaling she was paying attention. The placement order, Amelia said, without preamble. November 2nd, 1981. Every single assessment field for the Dursley guardianship, welfare evaluation, suitability assessment, alternative placements considered, blank. Authorized by Dumbledore alone, no Wisengamot approval, which should have been mandatory. She looked at Harry. That means when you were 15 months old, he placed you in that house without any of the checks that were legally required. And then sealed the file. Harry was quiet for a moment. He'd known this, in the abstract. He'd written about the guardianship document in the letter. But hearing it stated out loud, in specific legal terms, with the year attached, 1981, 15 months old, did something slightly different to him than knowing it had. There's more, Amelia said. In 1993, your second year, the Hogwarts administration filed a standard annual welfare report with the ministry. It's a routine form. It noted, under physical welfare indicators, that you were, she found the page. Quote, notably underweight and presenting with indicators consistent with nutritional insufficiency. Close quote. Harry stared at the paper. That report, Amelia said, was received by the Magical Guardian Oversight Division, and it was referred to Dumbledore's office, because his name was on the placement order, and it was filed. She looked up. Not acted on. Filed. The kitchen was very quiet. How many years? Harry asked. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. The school nurse has filed annual reports since your first year. 3 of the 4 flag physical welfare concerns. 2 specifically note nutritional indicators. Amelia put the page down. All 3 were referred to Dumbledore's office. None of them resulted in any action. Tonks set a mug of tea in front of Harry. He wrapped his hands around it without thinking. I want to be clear about what this means legally, Amelia said. It means that the evidence of neglect wasn't just knowable. It was known. It was reported through proper channels to the responsible party, who did nothing. She let that sit for a second. Every page of those reports has Dumbledore's name on the referral field. Every single one. Harry thought about that, about those forms, filed and forgotten, his name and his weight and the nurse's careful medical phrasing sitting in some filing cabinet somewhere in a ministry office, referred and dormant, year after year after year. What happens now? He said. Now, Amelia said, pulling out a fresh sheet, I file 9 counts. She began writing as she talked. Breach of guardianship duty under the 1973 Act, that's the blank placement order. Failure to act on welfare reports, that's 3 separate counts, 1 for each flagged report. Unauthorized sealing of public records, 1 count. Failure to obtain Wisengamot approval for a Muggle placement, 1 count. She paused. And then there's the question of whether the placement itself caused harm, which is technically a separate charge category and one that opens up a much larger. You said 9 counts, Harry said. I did. That's the letter. 9 pages. Amelia looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, she wasn't a warm person, but something that had the same effect. Yes, she said. In a sense. He looked down at his tea. It was strange, it should have felt like victory, or satisfaction, or something large and triumphant. It felt mostly like a very long, quiet exhale. Like the way you felt after you'd been holding your breath for so long you'd stopped noticing, and someone finally opened a window. "What does Dumbledore do when he finds out about the charges?" he asked. "He's already finding out," Amelia said. "I expect he'll request a meeting. He'll make a reasonable case about security implications, the blood wards on the Dursley property, the protection they provide, the Voldemort situation." She gathered her papers. "He'll be calm and measured and he'll say everything in exactly the right order. He's very good at it." "I know. And everything he says will probably be true, or at least partly true, which is what makes it complicated." She looked at him directly. "The blood wards are real. The protection is real. The threat from Voldemort is real. None of that makes what happened to you acceptable, and none of it is a legal defense for the blank placement order or the unanswered welfare reports." She paused. "But he'll present it as though it is. And a lot of people will find that very persuasive." "But not you," Harry said. "I have read the case law on child welfare protections going back 40 years, she said, "and there is no clause anywhere that says, unless there are strategic considerations. The law protects children. It doesn't have exceptions for chess pieces." She said it flatly, and Harry thought it was possible that last sentence wasn't entirely legal language. He decided not to point that out. Tonks, from the other end of the table, said, "For what it's worth, Dumbledore sent an owl here at 6. Amelia looked at her. Then at Harry. "And?" "I didn't open it," Harry said. A very small pause. "Good," Amelia said. She turned back to her papers. "Very good." That night, Harry sat in the garden as the light went out of the sky, slowly, the way summer evenings do, the blue going deep and then deeper. Hedwig was on his shoulder, which she'd started doing since they'd left Privet Drive, as if she felt the change in circumstances and was expressing solidarity. He thought about the blank forms. He thought about the 3 welfare reports, flagged and filed, his weight and his physical indicators documented in nurse's handwriting and sent through proper channels to the proper authority who had done precisely nothing. He thought about Dumbledore sitting in his office behind his half-moon glasses and his twinkling blue eyes and his absolute certainty that the chessboard was arranged correctly, that the greater good was being served, that the small manageable damage to one boy was the acceptable cost of saving everyone else. And the thing was, he understood it. Not agreed with it. But understood it. He could see the logic from inside, the way the whole thing probably looked from where Dumbledore was standing, the blood wards, the protection, the prophecy, the plan. The view from up there where you could see all the pieces on the board probably made it look very different. What Dumbledore had never quite managed, Harry thought, was to look at the board from where the piece was standing. He heard the back door open and Tonks appeared, 2 mugs in hand. She held one out and he took it and she sat on the garden step beside him without asking if it was all right, which he found he didn't mind at all. "You're doing the far-away thinking thing," she observed. "Is that what it looks like? The staring at the dark thing?" She sipped her tea. "My cousin Sirius does it. Did it, I mean. Before, well." She paused. "He's out, you know. You know that, right?" "Yeah. Escaped. I helped, actually. Sort of." He looked at her. "He's my godfather." "I know. Which is relevant, actually, to the legal stuff. Amelia mentioned it earlier. If Sirius's name is cleared," she stopped herself. "Sorry. That's getting ahead of things." Harry looked at the sky. It had gone full dark now, stars appearing. "How long have you been an Auror?" 2 years. Qualified last year, actually. Youngest in my intake." She said it with the specific unpride of someone who was proud but had decided to be casual about it. "My mum didn't want me to do it. She wanted something safer. But then she married my dad, so she can't really talk about safe choices." "Your dad's a muggle?" Ted Tonks. He's a builder from Leeds. He's wonderful. She smiled. My mum's family had opinions about that. Hence the disownment. She looked sideways at Harry. The black family tapestry has more burn marks on it than faces, at this point. My mum, Sirius, a couple others. She paused. Which is its own kind of qualification, weirdly. For this job. Coming from people who thought the rules were for other people? Something like that. She turned her mug in her hands. I'm telling you this because, Amelia's very good. She's the best person I know at what she does. And she'll do everything right legally and it'll matter. She looked at him squarely. But systems move slowly. Even when they work. And there are going to be days in the middle of this when it feels like nothing is moving, or like the wrong people are winning the argument, and I want you to know, it's moving. Even when it doesn't feel like it. Harry looked at her. She was maybe 23, he thought, with pink hair and a chipped mug and the particular no-nonsense warmth of someone who'd chosen their values deliberately rather than inherited them. He found he trusted her in the specific way you trusted someone who wasn't trying to get anything from you. Tonks, he said. Thank you. For the eggs earlier. And, all of it. She waved a hand. Standard Auror operations. Make eggs, drink tea, manage the end of an era. She stood and picked up her mug. Get some sleep, Potter. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. He looked up at her. Is it going to be okay? She looked back at him with an expression that was honest enough not to make promises and steady enough to mean something anyway. Amelia Bones has 9 counts and a warrant, she said. And Dumbledore's name is on every page. She raised her mug slightly. Yeah. I think it's going to be okay. She went inside. Harry sat for a few more minutes in the dark garden, with Hedwig warm on his shoulder and his tea going cold, and thought about blank forms and sealed records and the particular strange feeling of being a person who had decided to be seen. Above him, the stars were very bright. He went inside, and locked nothing. Chapter 3, What the Law is for Sirius Black arrived at the safe house at 8:30 in the morning, which was earlier than anyone had expected and approximately 12 hours before Amelia had said he should come. Harry heard the commotion from upstairs, raised voices, the specific thud of someone walking very fast, Proudfoot saying something firm that wasn't being listened to. He came down in yesterday's clothes to find Sirius in the kitchen doorway looking like he'd traveled through the night and several hedgerows to get there, his hair wild, his robes crumpled, his eyes doing the thing they did where they were so intensely focused they were almost alarming. They looked at each other for a second. Then Sirius crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled Harry into a hug that was less like an embrace and more like a man making sure something was still real. Harry stood in it for a moment, slightly surprised, and then hugged back, and felt Sirius's hand grip the back of his head the way people did when they were trying not to say something. Behind them, Tonks said, "How did you even find this place?" "Remus told me the ward signature," Sirius said, into Harry's hair. "Remus doesn't know the ward signature. He will once he does." Sirius let Harry go and held him at arm's length and looked at him, and the look on his face was complicated in the way that faces got when several years of guilt tried to arrive all at once. "You look thin." "I'm fine," Harry said. "You look very thin." "I just ate breakfast." Sirius looked around the kitchen, apparently checking the validity of this claim against available evidence, then looked back at Harry. "Tell me what happened. From the beginning. All of it." Harry pulled out a chair and sat down. "How much do you know?" Remus heard through the order that Bones had gone to Privet Drive. "I heard the same thing about 3 seconds later through a different channel and I left." He sat down across from Harry and leaned his forearms on the table in the intense, slightly forward way he had, like he couldn't quite manage sitting back. "I've been traveling since last night." "What happened?" So Harry told him. He started with the letter, which Sirius's expression did very interesting things in response to. He described the Aurors arriving, Amelia and her legal pad and her flat professional neutrality that wasn't neutrality at all, the confrontation with Uncle Vernon that had been so undramatic it was almost funny in retrospect. Sirius listened through all of it without interrupting, which took visible effort, his jaw getting progressively tighter at specific points, the part about the cat flap, the part about the welfare reports, the part about the blank placement order. When Harry finished, Sirius was very still. November 2nd, he said. 1981, that's when the placement order was filed. I was in Azkaban by November 2nd. Something moved across Sirius's face, old pain, the banked kind, the kind that had been lived with so long it was structural. I was arrested on the morning of the 2nd. Which means when he placed you with the Dursleys, he knew. He stopped. Pressed his mouth together. He knew I hadn't been assessed. He knew I existed as an option and he didn't. He sealed the file, Harry said. Yeah. Sirius's voice had gone very quiet. He sealed it before anyone could ask why the Godfather wasn't even considered. The kitchen was quiet. Tonks was making tea with her back to them, very deliberately not turning around, giving them the space of her not looking. Sirius, Harry said carefully. I need you to not do anything. Sirius looked at him. What? I mean, I need you to not go and do something that blows this up. Amelia's built something that works. There are 9 counts, there's a warrant, there's a formal process that, Harry met his eyes. That actually has a chance of doing something permanent. Not just, moving me somewhere different for a few months. Something that changes the record. And if you go and hex Dumbledore in a corridor, I wasn't going to hex him in a corridor, Sirius said. Weren't you? A pause. I was going to do it somewhere more private. Sirius. I'm joking. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm partly joking. Harry, he put you in that house. He left you there for 13 years and he knew, the report said, I know. Harry's voice was steady. I know all of that. And it's being handled. Amelia is handling it through channels that will stick. If you do something loud and dramatic, the story becomes about you. And the story needs to be about the blank forms and the welfare reports and the placement order that has his name on it. He held Sirius's gaze. Do you understand? Something happened in Sirius's face. It was the specific look of a man who was hearing something from someone he expected to be younger than their words. Yeah, he said, after a moment. I understand. Good. Harry sat back. Also, can you actually be here? You're still, technically a fugitive, yes. Sirius waved a hand. The Ministry knows I'm innocent. They just haven't gotten around to the formal, that's one way to put it, Tonks said, from the counter, still with her back to them. I'm operating in a legal gray area, Sirius said, with the dignity of someone who had said this sentence before. As long as I'm inside Ministry-secured premises, I'm technically absolutely not supposed to be here, Tonks said. She turned around and put 2 mugs on the table and looked at Sirius with the expression of someone doing complex calculations. But since Madame Bones knows you exist and knows you're Harry's godfather, and since she's the one currently overturning every assumption about Harry's legal situation, I'm guessing she might have thoughts about your status that she hasn't had time to formalize yet. She paused. That is pure speculation and not official Ministry policy. Sirius looked at Harry. Harry looked at Sirius. They both looked at Tonks. She's sharp, Sirius said, to Harry. Yeah, Harry agreed. Amelia arrived at 10 with a briefcase and Kingsley Shacklebolt, who was tall enough to have to duck through the farmhouse door and moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who was very comfortable in difficult rooms. He nodded at Harry with the calm of someone who'd been briefed thoroughly and wasn't going to make it awkward. Then he saw Sirius, and a complicated look passed across his face, and he looked at Amelia. I'll explain later, Amelia said. She looked at Sirius. "You're early. I've been told that before. Sit down." She set her briefcase on the table and clicked it open and began pulling out folders with the efficiency of a general setting up a field position. "Since you're here, you might as well hear this directly, which saves time." Shacklebolt, close the door. When everyone was settled, Harry and Sirius on one side of the table, Tonks at the end, Shacklebolt leaning against the wall because the chairs weren't adequate to his dimensions, Amelia opened the first folder. "Here is where we are," she said. "The 9 counts are filed. The Wisengamot's administrative office has confirmed receipt, and a preliminary review panel has been assigned. Given the seniority of the person named in the counts, the review will be conducted by 3 senior Wisengamot members who are specifically not connected to Dumbledore's political bloc. That took some doing, but it's done." She looked up briefly. "A formal hearing has been scheduled for 10 days' time. Not a trial, a preliminary inquiry, which is essentially the court asking whether there's a case to answer. Given the blank placement form and the unacted welfare reports, I'm confident the answer is yes." "What happens at the inquiry?" Harry asked. "Testimony. Mine, presenting the documentary evidence. Potentially yours, if you choose to give it, and that's entirely your choice, Harry, you're under no obligation." She turned a page. "Potentially the school nurse, Poppy Pomfrey, whose welfare reports are central to 3 of the counts. And Dumbledore will have the right to respond." "He'll come," Sirius said. It wasn't a question. "He'll come," Amelia agreed. "And he'll be prepared and he'll be very good, because he's always very good." She said it without rancor, just as a fact to be planned around. "Which is why I want the documentary evidence to be absolutely airtight before we walk into that room." She closed the folder. "I'm telling you all of this because I want everyone in this house on the same page. No independent action, no leaks to the press, Rita Skeeter," Harry said. "She'd have a field day. She'd turn it into a circus and let Dumbledore walk out the other side with the audience's sympathy," Amelia said, without hesitation. "Skeeter writes stories, not facts. I need facts to be facts and only facts for the next 10 days. She looked at Sirius. "That means no confrontations. No owls. No going anywhere near the man." Sirius was quiet. "Sirius," Amelia said. It was one word, and she said it in the way she said most things, without particular emphasis, just the tone of someone who was used to being listened to, but it landed. "I heard you," he said. "Good." She pulled out a second folder. "Now. Your situation." Sirius's posture shifted fractionally. Harry watched him. "Formally, you're an escaped prisoner," Amelia said. "Informally, your case has been, let's call it tabled, since Fudge decided that acknowledging the truth about Pettigrew would require acknowledging that the Ministry made a catastrophic error in 1981. He's been avoiding that rather than fixing it." She opened the folder. "I've filed for an emergency review of your conviction. Given the current circumstances, and given that you're materially relevant to Harry's guardianship situation as his named godfather, I can make a case for immediate legal status review under the Guardian provision of the Persons Act." The kitchen was very quiet. "You're saying," Sirius started. "I'm saying that if we can get you legal status quickly enough, you become a legitimate alternative guardian for Harry, which is considerably more powerful than an escaped fugitive trying to argue from the margins." She looked at him steadily. "But that process is slower than the inquiry. It will take longer than 10 days. In the meantime, you're here, you're under ministry-recognized temporary status as a person of interest in an open case, and you do not leave this property without Auror escort." "You're basically arresting me," Sirius said. "I'm basically protecting you," Amelia said. "There's a difference, and I'd appreciate it if you noticed which one it is." Another silence. Sirius looked at Harry, and Harry looked back with an expression that was trying very hard not to say "I told you not to do anything." "Fine," Sirius said. Temporary status. Here. Not leaving. He paused. Can I at least communicate with Remus Lupin? Yes. Through channels I'll establish. Amelia snapped her briefcase closed. Anyone else requires my sign-off. She stood. Shacklebolt is going to go through everything with you this afternoon. I have a meeting I'd rather not have. Dumbledore? Harry asked. Yes. What are you going to say to him? She picked up her coat. The truth, she said. In specific legal terms, with the relevant documents as exhibits. She looked at Harry. He's going to ask about you. He's going to ask to see you. What would you like me to tell him? Harry thought about the unanswered owl from last night, sitting somewhere out on the beach-lined drive, tapping glass he hadn't opened. He thought about 4 years of "trust me, Harry," and the specific weight of what that phrase had actually required. Tell him not yet, Harry said. Amelia nodded once. Not yet, she agreed. She met Dumbledore in her office at noon, which was her choice. She'd had the meeting moved twice, from the conference room to his office, suggestion to her office, each move a small, clear statement about where the authority in this conversation resided. He arrived exactly on time, which was its own kind of statement. He was wearing deep blue robes and his expression was precisely calibrated, neither defensive nor entirely at ease, the expression of a man who had decided that measured openness was his most effective posture. His half-moon glasses caught the light from her window. He sat down in her visitor's chair without being invited, which was the move of someone who'd decided that treating it as a routine meeting would make it one. Amelia, he said. Thank you for seeing me. Albus, she said. She had 3 folders on her desk, the placement order, the welfare reports, and a summary of the 9 counts. She left them all closed. I've read your letter requesting this meeting. You mentioned security implications. I did. He folded his hands. I want to begin by saying that I understand why you took the action you took. Reading Harry's account, the conditions he described, I can see how those conditions, documented in isolation, would require the response you gave. They weren't documented in isolation, she said. They were documented, flagged, referred to your office, and not acted on. 3 times. A small pause. Yes, he said. I want to address that. Please. He looked at her with the eyes that everyone who met Dumbledore mentioned eventually, that specific quality of attention, like being read carefully by something that had been reading a very long time. She looked back with her own eyes, which were gray and direct and had been looking at difficult men across a desk for 15 years. The blood wards, he said. I need you to understand what they are and what they do, because without that context the decisions I made in 1981 are genuinely incomprehensible. He leaned forward slightly. When Lily Potter died, she died in an act of sacrificial protection for her son. That act created a magical protection that exists specifically in the blood of her nearest living relative, Petunia Dursley. For that protection to function, Harry had to live with Petunia. Not near her. With her. Under her roof, in her house, recognized by her as family. He paused. Without that specific placement, Voldemort could have reached Harry at any point in his childhood. In any house, any wizarding home, any alternative arrangement you might propose. He would have been unprotected. Amelia was quiet for a moment. That's the security implication. Yes. And the blank assessment fields? I made a decision under emergency conditions, in the immediate aftermath of Voldemort's fall, with intelligence suggesting that Death Eaters were still active and that Harry was a primary target. A full Wisengamot review would have taken weeks. The blood ward protection was active in the hours after Lily's death. He met her eyes. I made a judgment call. And the welfare reports, she said. Flagged and referred to you. 3 times, over 4 years. I monitored the situation, he said. I made periodic assessments. Through what channel? He was briefly quiet. Directly. Not through any formal welfare visit, not through any ministry channel, not through any mechanism that created a record. She opened the welfare report folder and slid it across the desk. This is what your office received and filed. 3 reports. Each flagging nutritional concerns. Each requiring a formal response under the 1973 Act within 30 days. She pointed at each one in turn. The response field on every single one is blank. He looked at the forms. His expression was very composed, but she'd been reading faces for a long time and she saw the thing that composed expressions were designed to conceal, which in this case was the specific look of a man confronting something he'd known was there but had not expected to have to look at directly. I was monitoring, he started. I'm sure you were. Informally. In whatever way seemed sufficient to you. She took the folder back. The problem is that your informal assessment and the formal requirement of the 1973 Act are not the same thing, and the legal standard is the formal one. She closed the folder. I'm not here to argue about your intentions. I'm here because the evidence in front of me constitutes multiple breaches of the child welfare provisions, documented and time-stamped, and my job is to ensure the law is applied consistently regardless of who's named in the relevant field. She folded her hands. You know the law, Albus. Better than most people in this building. I do, he agreed. Then you understand that the security justification, which I take seriously, and which will be considered at the inquiry, doesn't address the compliance failures. It may explain the initial placement decision. It doesn't explain the unanswered welfare reports. He was quiet for a longer moment this time. She let it be quiet. People filled silences when they had things to say, and Dumbledore was a man who always had things to say, which meant silence was one of the few things that actually pressured him. What do you want from me? He said, finally. Not the formal answer. The actual answer. The actual answer, she said, is that I want the record to accurately reflect what happened. Not a version of it that was sealed before anyone could look. The actual record, with the actual decisions, attributed to the person who made them. She held his gaze. And I want Harry Potter to be removed from a situation that has been damaging him since before he could read, and placed somewhere that doesn't require him to trade his well-being for magical protection that, while I understand its importance, could surely have been maintained alongside adequate food and a door without external locks. Something moved in Dumbledore's face. It was brief. She didn't know quite what to call it. It wasn't guilt, or not only that. It was something more complicated, the expression of a man who had been looking at a chessboard for so long that someone pointing at the pieces and saying those are people felt like a category error. I would like to speak with Harry, he said. He's asked for time, she said. I'll communicate when he's ready. And the inquiry? 10 days. You'll receive formal notification tomorrow. She stood. Albus. I want to be clear about something. She waited until he looked at her. I have a great deal of respect for what you've done and for what you represent. I know what you've sacrificed and I know how hard the war was and I know you've been carrying the weight of this for decades. She paused. But I've been the head of this department for 15 years, and in that time I have held every person who came through the legal process to the same standard, Death Eater or Order member, old family or new blood, famous or forgotten. That's what the law is for. She held his gaze. I'm not going to change that process for you. I don't think you'd want me to. He stood. He was very tall, and he used it sometimes the way powerful people used every tool available to them, but he didn't now. He stood and he looked at her with those careful, reading eyes, and something in his expression was, she thought, and she might have been wrong, almost like relief. The very small, very buried relief of someone who had been waiting a long time to meet a wall they couldn't talk their way through. No, he said. I wouldn't. He left. She stood at her office window for a moment and watched the street below, the quiet afternoon, the ministry workers moving in and out of the building across the road. Then she went back to her desk and wrote for another 2 hours. It was Shacklebolt who told Harry about the meeting that evening, in the matter-of-fact way that Harry was beginning to recognize as his natural register: big, calm, warm without being effusive, the kind of person who made you feel like whatever was happening was manageable. She held her ground, Shacklebolt said. He was sitting at the kitchen table across from Harry, his large hands wrapped around a mug, his Auror robes still on from the day. He pushed on the security angle. The blood ward explanation is real, Harry, I want you to know that. The wards are genuine, the protection is genuine. I know, Harry said. That's always been the thing, hasn't it? He's not making it up. There's always a real reason. Yes. But a real reason isn't the same as a reason that justifies everything. Harry looked at his hands. The blood ward explains why I had to live there. It doesn't explain the cupboard. Or the food. Or the locked door. Shacklebolt nodded slowly. That's more or less what Madame Bones said. Sirius appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd been in the living room for the past hour, doing something that involved pacing and intermittent muttering that Harry had been diplomatically not hearing. What did he say when she gave him the welfare reports? He said he was monitoring the situation informally, Shacklebolt said. Sirius's expression did something controlled. He was monitoring it informally. Kingsley, Harry said, before Sirius could continue. What's the realistic outcome? From the inquiry. Be straight. Shacklebolt considered this with the careful weight of someone who understood the difference between honesty and cruelty. The documentary evidence is strong. The blank forms are hard to explain away. The welfare reports are time-stamped and the non-response is recorded. He turned his mug in his hands. Dumbledore will present the security context and a significant portion of the Wisengamot will find that compelling. Fudge will try to make the whole thing go away, which will partly cancel out. Fudge trying to dismiss something tends to make it look more credible, not less. He paused. The realistic outcome, I think, is a formal censure. Not a criminal finding, that's a much higher bar and a longer process. But a formal finding that the welfare requirements were not met, that the placement was improperly authorized, and that better oversight should have been applied. He looked at Harry. It won't feel like enough. I want to be honest about that. A formal censure of Albus Dumbledore, Sirius said, from the doorway. In the record. Permanently. Yes. And Harry's guardianship? That's the more immediate outcome. The current guardianship is suspended pending the inquiry. After the inquiry, it'll either go to an alternative guardian or to a formal ministry arrangement. In either case, it won't go back to the Dursleys. Shacklebolt looked at Sirius. Your situation complicates it. If your conviction review goes quickly, you become the obvious alternative. But there are no guarantees on timeline. And if it doesn't go quickly? Harry asked. Then I'm your temporary guardian, Amelia said, from the hallway. They all turned. She'd come in quietly, coat still on, briefcase in hand, her expression suggesting she'd been standing there for roughly the last 30 seconds. I filed the paperwork this afternoon, she said, setting her briefcase down. In the event that Sirius's legal status isn't resolved before the inquiry, and pending Wisengamot approval, I've applied to be named temporary guardian. It's unusual but not without precedent. She looked at Harry. You would have the right to object to that, if you wanted to. Harry looked at her. She was exactly what she'd been since the moment she appeared at Privet Drive, direct and competent and entirely uninterested in performing anything other than what she was. She hadn't once told him to be patient, or to trust the plan, or that things were being handled and he didn't need to worry. She'd told him exactly what was happening every time he asked. I don't object, he said. She nodded, once. Good. She put her coat on the hook. There's another development. Fudge has leaked to the prophet. The kitchen went still. What did they print? Shacklebolt asked. Nothing yet. The leak was to Rita Skeeter, and she's sitting on it, which means she's working out how to make it most damaging. Amelia sat down and pulled off her outer robe and draped it over the back of her chair with the brisk efficiency of someone transitioning between operational modes. She'll file something tomorrow most likely. My best guess is she frames it as either Dumbledore persecution, which plays to his supporters, or ministry overreach against Harry, which plays to the people who think I'm acting on Fudge's behalf, which I am emphatically not. Can't you stop it? Sirius asked. Press freedom, Amelia said flatly. No. What I can do is ensure that when the story runs, the factual record is so clearly established that the narrative can't replace it. Which means I need the documents filed and public before tomorrow morning. She pulled a folder from her briefcase. Which is what I'm about to do. Harry watched her open the folder and pick up her pen and start writing, right there at the kitchen table with everyone around her, with the total concentration of someone who had already sorted through the noise and gotten to the work. He thought about Dumbledore in his office, behind his careful eyes and his measured words, the chessboard visible only to him. He thought about the blank forms. He thought about the word monitoring. Amelia, he said. She looked up. He said he was monitoring the situation informally. Harry met her eyes. Did he say what he saw when he did? She put down her pen. He said he made periodic assessments. He didn't specify what they found. Because if he assessed it and saw what was happening and decided it was acceptable, that's different from not knowing. He kept his voice even. I want the inquiry to ask that question. She looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, Shacklebolt was very still. Tonks had appeared at the kitchen door with a dish towel in her hands and the focused expression of someone filing information away. Yes, Amelia said. It is different. She picked up her pen again. I'll make sure it's asked. That night was quieter than the one before it, in the specific way of a house where people are keeping themselves busy with separate preparations. Shacklebolt wrote up case notes at the kitchen table. Tonks did something with ward diagnostics by the front door. Proudfoot slept, which Harry envied. Sirius found Harry on the upstairs landing, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his knees up, because there was a window at the end of the hallway that looked out over the beech trees and he liked watching them move. Sirius sat down on the floor beside him, which Harry had always found one of the more appealing things about Sirius, the complete willingness to sit on floors without any of the adult self-consciousness about it. He was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for him, and Harry waited. I'm sorry, Sirius said. For what? You haven't done anything. For not being there. Before. He looked at the window. I know it's not, I couldn't have, I was in Azkaban, I know all of that. But it's still true that you were in that house for 13 years and the one person who should have been kicking down doors was in a cell. He was quiet for a second. He put me there. You know that. Dumbledore. He had information that could have, not immediately, maybe, but the investigation into my supposed crimes was fast. Too fast. If it had been slower, if there'd been any evidence gathered at all rather than just accepting that the obvious answer was right, I know, Harry said. I think about that. What you would have had. I was 22 when you were born, which seems absurdly young now. I probably would have been absolutely terrible at it, probably, Harry agreed. Sirius looked at him sideways. Rude. You'd have been great. Harry looked at the beech trees. But you would have. Terrible at the practical stuff, probably. Brilliant at the rest of it. He paused. I don't need you to apologize for things that weren't your fault. No. But I'm apologizing for them anyway because, Sirius ran a hand through his hair. Because someone should have said it before now. You've been carrying all of this around since you were old enough to understand it, and no one has ever just said, I'm sorry you were there. I'm sorry it happened to you. Full stop, no addendum, no explanation for why it was necessary. He looked at Harry. So. I'm sorry. Harry was quiet for a moment. The beech trees moved in the dark, their leaves catching what light there was, that particular restless sighing motion of large trees in a night breeze. Thank you, he said, and meant it simply, without qualification. They sat on the floor for a while, not saying much, which felt more like company than a lot of conversations Harry had had in rooms full of people. Eventually Sirius said, Amelia Bones. Yeah. She's something, isn't she? She is, Harry said. I've known of her for years. Never actually met her. He paused. She genuinely doesn't care about the political weight of any of this. She just reads the form and applies the law. That's exactly it, Harry said. That's exactly what she does. It sounds simple when you say it like that. It is simple. That's the thing. Harry pulled his knees tighter. It's supposed to be simple. It's only complicated because everyone decided that some people were too important for the simple version. He paused. She just decided they weren't. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, what are you going to say? At the inquiry. If you testify. Harry thought about it. Not what he would say, he knew what he would say, he'd written it in 9 pages and it hadn't changed since, but how to describe the feeling of it. The truth, he said. I'm going to say the truth. Every part of it. Not the version that's easy to hear and not the version that makes anyone look better than they were. He looked at Sirius. I've spent 4 years being told what to say and how to say it and when to say it, and the whole time I kept thinking, at some point someone will ask the right question and I can just answer it honestly and that'll be enough. He paused. Amelia asked the right question. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. 12 years ago, he said quietly, you were 15 months old and you were the single most important child in our world, and you had no idea, and you couldn't protect yourself, and the person responsible for protecting you decided that a specific kind of protection was the same as all kinds. He shook his head. The blood ward kept you safe from Voldemort, Harry. It didn't keep you safe from what happened inside that house. No, Harry said. It didn't. They sat for another few minutes. The beech trees kept moving. Somewhere downstairs, Amelia was still writing. Get some sleep, Sirius said finally. He unfolded himself from the floor with the slightly creaky dignity of a man who'd been on the run and then on a floor, which was not a good combination for joints. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. That's the second time someone said that to me, Harry said. Then perhaps you should believe it. Harry stood. He looked at the window one more time, the dark drive, the old trees, the small square of sky visible above them. Then he went to his room, which had no locks on the outside of the door, and lay down, and slept. In the morning, the prophet ran 3 inches on page 4, Dumbledore named in Ministry investigation. Skeeter's byline. The angle was confused, half condemnation, half outrage on Dumbledore's behalf, which told Harry that she'd gotten the story too late to shape it properly and had filed it half-baked rather than lose the scoop. He read it at the kitchen table while Sirius made eggs over his shoulder and Tonks read the same article over Harry's other shoulder and Shacklebolt sat across from them with his notes and his own copy of the Prophet, already annotated. She doesn't have the welfare reports, Shacklebolt said. She's working from the basic filing information. She doesn't know about the blank placement order. She will, Amelia said. She was already in her coat. Which is why I filed everything publicly at 6 this morning. She picked up her briefcase. By the time she gets to the ministry archives, it's already on the record. Harry looked up from the article. You filed it publicly at 6 in the morning. I got up early. She moved to the door. The inquiry is in 10 days. I'll be in the office. Kingsley has everything he needs here. She paused. Harry. Don't read too much Skeeter. She's going to say things about you that aren't true, and she's going to say things about Dumbledore that make him sound like a victim, and neither version is the one that matters. What's the one that matters? He asked. The one in the documents, she said. The one with dates and signatures and blank fields where information should be. She opened the door. That one doesn't change, regardless of what the prophet prints. She left. The house felt slightly different when she wasn't in it, not lesser, exactly, but like a specific frequency had dropped out of the air. Sirius put a plate of eggs in front of Harry. Harry looked at them and then looked at Sirius, and Sirius was doing the thing again, making sure something was real. Eat, Sirius said. Harry ate. Outside, the beech trees were bright in the morning, and the prophet was on the table with its confused angle and its incomplete story, and somewhere in a ministry office Amelia Bones was already filing the next thing, and the record, the actual record, with its dates and its signatures and its terrible, irrefutable blank spaces, was sitting in the public archive where anyone could read it. 10 days, Harry thought. 10 days. He finished his eggs. Chapter 4. The hearing. The Wisengamot chamber smelled like old wood and older arguments. Harry had been in the ministry before, the entrance hall, the lifts, the corridors that all looked slightly the same, but he'd never been in the lower levels where the formal hearing rooms were, and the descent felt significant in the way that architecture sometimes made things feel, the ceiling getting higher as the floor got lower, the torchlight getting warmer and more deliberate. It was the kind of room that had been designed to make people understand, on a bodily level, that something serious was happening here. He walked in beside Amelia and didn't look intimidated, because he wasn't. He'd faced a basilisk and a dragon and Voldemort in a graveyard, and the thing about all of those experiences was that they had permanently recalibrated his sense of what actually constituted a threat. A room full of witches and wizards in plum-colored robes was not on that list. Sirius was not with them. Sirius's legal status review was still processing, which meant he was technically still confined to the safe house, and Harry had spent 20 minutes that morning talking him down from the particular ledge of a man who wanted to be present for something he couldn't attend. Tonks had stayed with him, which Harry suspected was as much to stop him doing something inadvisable as for company. Shacklebolt was 3 steps behind Harry, which he'd been for the past 10 days with the quiet consistency of a man who had decided something was his responsibility and was simply getting on with it. Harry had asked him once, on day 4, why he seemed so committed to this when he'd started out as a random assignment. Shacklebolt had thought about it for a moment and then said, "I've spent a lot of years enforcing decisions that were made badly. This is the first time in a while I've had the chance to enforce a decision that was made well." Harry hadn't needed to ask anything else after that. The chamber seated about 60. Approximately 40 of those seats were filled today, which Amelia had told him was high attendance for a preliminary inquiry. Ordinarily these things drew a handful of panel members and some administrative staff. Today there were ministry officials, Wisengamot members, a cluster of people Harry didn't recognize who had the look of legal observers, and, in the back row, 2 reporters who had been permitted entry under strict conditions about what they could publish and when. The 3-person panel was already seated at the elevated bench at the front of the chamber. Harry recognized none of them, which was apparently the point. Amelia had been very specific about ensuring no one sat on this panel who had any prior relationship with Dumbledore's office or Fudge's. The center seat held an older woman with the upright posture of someone who had spent decades not being impressed by things. Her name was Griselda Marchbanks, and Amelia had described her as the most technically rigorous legal mind on the Wisengamot currently operating, which Harry had taken as a very good sign. Dumbledore was already there too. Harry had known he would be. He'd thought about this moment, sitting in the car on the way over, half listening to Amelia running through procedure, what it would feel like to see him. For years of Dumbledore as the fixed point of the wizarding world, the assured north on the compass everyone used to orient themselves. Seeing him across a formal chamber as the subject of 9 counts of legal breach was going to be either shattering or clarifying, and Harry had hoped, quietly, that it would be clarifying. It was. Dumbledore was seated to the left, beside a legal representative whose name Harry didn't know, in deep blue robes, and he looked exactly as he always looked, composed, attentive, the slight suggestion of wisdom worn lightly. But the room didn't reshape itself around him the way rooms usually did. This room had a specific logic and a specific authority that wasn't his, and that made him look, for the first time, like a person sitting in a chair rather than a force of nature occupying a space. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Neither of them did anything with that for a moment. Then Harry sat down beside Amelia and turned to the panel. Griselda Marchbanks ran the hearing with the efficiency of someone who considered wasted time a personal affront. She opened at precisely 9 o'clock, stated the purpose and scope of the inquiry in 2 sentences, reminded everyone present of the publication restrictions, and looked at Amelia. Madam Bones. You filed 9 counts under the child welfare provisions of the 1973 Magical Persons Act, relating to the placement and ongoing guardianship of Harry James Potter, a magical minor, between November 1981 and the present date. You may present. Amelia stood. She had a folder on the table in front of her and a calm that Harry had come to recognize as genuinely structural, not performed, not the tight composure of someone managing anxiety, but the actual settled calm of a person who had prepared so thoroughly that the room held no surprises. Thank you, Madam Marchbanks. She opened the folder. The first count relates to the placement order of November 2, 1981. I'd like to draw the panel's attention to the document now being distributed, a certified copy of the original, retrieved under warrant from sealed ministry archives. The copies moved around the room. Harry watched the panel receive them. Marchbanks looked at the top sheet and her expression shifted in a specific way, not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes that said she was reading something she'd expected and also hadn't quite expected. As the panel can see, Amelia continued, the standard assessment fields required under Section 4 of the 1973 Act, welfare evaluation of proposed guardians, assessment of the minor's specific needs, assessment of alternative placements considered, and Wisengamot approval for any Muggle placement, are entirely blank. Not incomplete. Not partially filled. Blank. She looked up at the panel. The authorizing signature on this form is Albus Dumbledore. Silence in the chamber. Not uncomfortable silence, legal silence, the kind that rooms like this use to let information land. Counts 2 through 4 relate to 3 welfare reports filed by the Hogwarts school nurse, Madame Poppy Pomfrey, during Harry Potter's first, second, and third years at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Copies are being distributed. She waited. Each report was filed under the standard annual welfare protocol for magical minors in non-magical guardian arrangements. Each report flagged physical welfare concerns, specifically, indicators consistent with nutritional insufficiency. Each report was received by the Magical Guardian Oversight Division and referred, per standard procedure, to the named responsible party on the original placement order. She paused. To Albus Dumbledore. The response field on each referral is blank. In the back row, one of the reporters was writing very quickly. The response deadline under Section 7 of the Act is 30 days from referral. In each of the 3 cases, no response was filed. No welfare visit was documented. No formal assessment was conducted or recorded. She closed that section of the folder. Count 5 relates to the unauthorized sealing of public records, specifically, the placement order itself, sealed under Dumbledore's personal access codes in a manner that prevented standard departmental review. Count 6, Madam Bones. Dumbledore's legal representative, a trim man named Croker who had the professional ease of someone very expensive, raised a hand. If I may, at this point, we're not disputing the documentary record. Marchbanks looked at him. Mr. Croker, you'll have ample opportunity to present your response. Kindly allow Madam Bones to complete her presentation. Of course. He sat back. Amelia continued. Count 6 through 8 covered the Wisengamot approval failure, the specific period of unaddressed neglect to which the welfare reports pointed, and a newer count that she'd added on day 7, which Harry had known was coming, the failure to disclose, at the time of placement, the existence of a magical guardian, Sirius Black, whose legal status as Harry's godfather had been established prior to the placement and whose potential suitability as an alternative guardian had not been assessed. The room was very quiet for that one. Harry didn't look at Dumbledore. Count 9 was the smallest in language and the largest in weight. Amelia read it in the same even voice she'd used for all the others, but Harry heard the specific care with which she'd drafted it, sustained failure of the placing authority to ensure that the conditions of the minor's placement met the minimum standards of welfare required under law, over a period of not less than 3 years as documented, resulting in conditions materially inconsistent with the standard of care owed to a magical minor. She sat down. Marchbanks looked at her notes, made 2 marks, and looked at the panel members on either side of her. A brief, silent exchange. "We'll hear from the witness before the respondent's presentation," Marchbanks said. "Harry Potter. Are you prepared to give testimony?" Harry stood. He'd thought about this, specifically about standing up in this room and saying things that were true, out loud, in a formal setting, with people who had the power to put them in the record. He wasn't nervous. He was, if anything, more settled than he'd felt in weeks, because this was the thing the letter had always been moving toward, and now they were here. "Yes," he said. Marchbanks gave him the formal affirmation, magical oath to tell the truth in complete and accurate terms, and Harry repeated it and sat back down in the witness chair that had been set slightly forward of the presentation table. "Harry," Amelia said, "I'm going to ask you questions. Please answer as fully as you feel is accurate, and stop me at any point if a question is unclear." "Okay. Tell me about the room you slept in before your first year at Hogwarts." He told her. He said it the same way he'd written it, factual, specific, without performance. The cupboard. The lock on the outside. The size of it. The smell of it. How long he'd been there. He watched the panel while he spoke, and Marchbanks's face was doing the thing he'd seen Amelia's face do the first time she came to his room at Privet Drive, the careful neutral expression of someone keeping a professional lid on something. "And after your first Hogwarts letter arrived?" Amelia prompted. He described the bedroom. The 3 external locks. The bars on the window. The cat flap, and what it was for. He described it with the same flatness he'd used in the letter, because flat was accurate, it hadn't been dramatic, it had been ordinary, and the ordinariness of it was the point. "During the summers," Amelia said, "can you describe a typical day in terms of food?" He thought about how to say it. "There was always food in the house," he said. "The Dursleys weren't starving. There was usually, I got what was left. After they'd eaten." He paused. "Some days that was enough. Some days it wasn't." He looked at the panel. "By the end of first year I'd gotten pretty good at knowing which days were which. The kind of day it was usually depended on whether I'd done something that upset them recently, which could be a lot of things, getting a better grade than Dudley, accidentally doing magic, being noticeable in any way." "What happened when you were noticeable?" "Less food. More time in my room. If it was bad, the locks." He kept his voice steady. "The thing is, they weren't cruel in the way that shouts, if that makes sense. They were cold. Very normal on the outside and very cold on the inside. My aunt would put 1 piece of toast on the counter and walk out of the room, and that was it for the day, and if I said anything about it, the next day there was nothing." "Did you ever tell anyone at Hogwarts about these conditions?" He hesitated. This was the part he'd thought about the most. "Not directly. I told Ron and Hermione bits of it, over the years. They were sympathetic. They didn't have any way to do anything about it." He paused. "I never told a teacher. Or the headmaster." "Why not?" He looked at her. She knew the answer, she'd read the letter, but the question was for the panel. Because the headmaster was the one who'd put me there, he said. And every time he'd addressed it, which was a few times, obliquely, the way he did most things, he'd said it was necessary. That the protection required it. That they were family. And the way he said it made it feel like the conversation was over, like the bigger consideration had been named and the smaller one. He stopped. I got the impression that the smaller one was me. No one in the chamber spoke. I was 11 when I started Hogwarts, Harry continued, and he hadn't planned to say this. It came from a different place than the prepared answers, from somewhere that had been waiting for this specific room and this specific question. And I thought, because he came to get me himself, almost, he sent Hagrid and it felt like being found, I thought that was what it looked like when someone decided you mattered. And then the next summer I went back, and it was exactly the same. He looked at the table for a second. After 3 or 4 years you stop expecting the cavalry. You start trying to work out whether you can be your own. Marchbanks was very still. That's why you sent the letter to my department, Amelia said quietly. Yes. She sat back. Thank you, Harry. No further questions. Croaker stood for Dumbledore's presentation with the composed readiness of someone who had prepared for a difficult room and intended to hold his ground in it. The panel will appreciate, he began, that the situation before us is not a simple one. The documentary evidence presented by Madame Bones is accurate. We don't dispute the blank assessment fields. We don't dispute the unanswered welfare referrals. We don't dispute that the placement order didn't receive Wisengamot approval. He paused. What we dispute is the interpretation of those facts divorced from their context. He walked through the blood ward explanation with the thorough precision of someone who had filed a 16-page brief on the subject. The panel listened. Harry listened. It was all true, he'd known it was true, Amelia had told him it was true, the protective magic was real and the choice it necessitated was real. Croaker described Voldemort's fall, the immediate aftermath, the Death Eaters still active, the intelligence that Harry was a priority target. He described the time pressure, the protection active in the first hours, the need for immediate placement. He made it sound urgent and reasonable and humanly understandable, which it was, which was the hard part. Then Dumbledore spoke. He had requested the right to address the panel directly, which had been granted, and he stood with the quiet authority of someone who had addressed many rooms and knew how they worked. He didn't look at Harry. The decision to place Harry with the Dursleys was mine, he said. I made it alone, under emergency conditions, and I didn't follow the formal process that should have governed it. I have always known that. I sealed the records because I judged that the fewer people who knew the details of Harry's location and protection, the safer he would be. He paused. I sealed them too thoroughly and for too long, and that is my error. His voice was precise and self-contained. The welfare reports, he stopped, just fractionally, and Harry heard it, the tiny hesitation where something met some resistance. I received those reports. I reviewed their contents. I made a judgment that the conditions described, while not ideal, were within a range that could be tolerated given the protective necessity of Harry's placement. I was wrong to make that judgment unilaterally, without formal documentation, and without consulting either Harry or the appropriate welfare authorities. Marchbanks had been writing throughout. She put her pen down. Professor Dumbledore, she said. A clarifying question. Of course. When you describe reviewing the welfare reports and making a judgment that conditions were within a tolerable range, can you define for the panel what you understood those conditions to be, at the time of that judgment? A pause. The kind that would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't watching for it. The reports indicated nutritional insufficiency and some behavioral markers consistent with a restrictive home environment. And you judged those conditions tolerable. I judged the protective necessity to outweigh the welfare concerns, yes. Marchbanks wrote something. On whose authority did you determine the threshold for what constituted tolerable conditions for a magical minor? Another pause. My own. Was that determination documented anywhere? No. Did you consult anyone, a welfare professional, a legal advisor, the relevant ministry division, before making that determination? No. And the child in question? Marchbanks looked at her notes. Harry Potter. Did you at any point inform him that welfare reports had been filed, or that they had been reviewed and found insufficient to warrant action? The chamber was very quiet. No, Dumbledore said. Did you at any point ask him directly about his living conditions? Not in specific terms, no. Why not? Dumbledore was quiet for 3 full seconds, which was a very long time in a room like this. Then he said, carefully, I believe that asking directly would indicate to Harry that there was something to be concerned about, which would increase his anxiety about a situation I was already managing. Marchbanks looked at him for a long moment. You chose not to ask the child about his welfare because you thought it would worry him. Yes. Leaving him in those conditions without knowledge that anyone was aware of them or acting on them. Yes. The chamber breathed. Marchbanks made a note. Harry looked at his hands. He'd known this was what had happened, had understood it logically, had written about it, but hearing it stated in those terms, confirmed by the man himself in the flat legal language of a formal inquiry, was a different experience from knowing it. It was the difference between a description of cold and actually standing in it. He felt Amelia's attention on him from 2 feet away and he didn't look at her and he didn't adjust his expression. He just sat with it. Let it be what it was. The panel went into deliberation at noon and came back at 2:30. Harry had spent the break in a side room with Amelia and Shacklebolt and 2 cups of tea he hadn't drunk, and the conversation had been minimal and not about the hearing. Amelia had reviewed documents. Shacklebolt had checked something with a ministry messenger. Harry had sat with Hedwig's absence, she was at the safe house, and thought about exactly nothing in particular, which was a skill he'd developed over long summers in a small room. When they reconvened, the chamber had the different quality of a room that had shifted from process into verdict. People were straighter in their seats. The reporters had their quills ready. Marchbanks looked at her notes and then at the room. The panel has considered the evidence presented and the respondent's submission, she said. We find as follows. She looked down. On the matter of Count 1, the placement order of November 1981, the panel finds that the placement was made without the legally required assessments, without Wiesengemot approval, and under the sole authorization of a single individual without oversight. We find this constitutes a procedural breach of the 1973 Act. She turned a page. The security context presented by the respondent is noted. The panel acknowledges the genuine urgency described. We find, however, that urgency does not constitute a legal exemption from the assessment requirements, and that a placement can be initially emergency justified while still requiring formal review within a reasonable subsequent period. No such review was conducted or documented in 13 years. The breach finding stands. She continued. Counts 2 through 4, the welfare reports, were found substantiated. The panel's language on those was the most pointed. The failure to respond to formal welfare flagging, over a period of 3 years and 3 separate referrals, represents not an error of judgment but an absence of judgment, a choice, documented by its absence, to treat the minor's welfare as a secondary consideration. Count 5, the record sealing, found substantiated, with the note that the sealing had lasted significantly longer than any emergency justification could plausibly support. Count 6, the Wiesengemot approval failure, substantiated. Count 7, the Godfather non-disclosure, substantiated, with a specific note that the failure to assess Sirius Black as an alternative guardian, regardless of his subsequent arrest, should have been formally documented and the decision recorded. Counts 8 and 9. The chamber was very still. Harry watched Marchbanks and she was reading from her notes with the careful delivery of someone who understood that what they said next was going to be in the record permanently. The panel finds, on counts 8 and 9, that the sustained conditions in the placement constituted neglect within the meaning of the Act. We find further that the respondent, as the placing authority and the named responsible party on all subsequent welfare referrals, bears direct institutional responsibility for those conditions not being addressed. She looked up. We are issuing a formal censure of Albus Dumbledore in his capacity as placing authority and guardian oversight party for Harry James Potter. This censure will be entered permanently into the Wisengamot record. It will be public and it will not be sealed. The chamber exhaled. Additionally, Marchbanks continued, and her voice was unchanged but something in the room tightened again. The panel is referring the matter of Count 1's procedural breach to the full Wisengamot for consideration of whether the circumstances warrant further sanction against the respondent in his capacity as Chief Warlock. That is a separate proceeding with a higher burden of proof and we make no findings on it today. She set down her notes. On the matter of Harry Potter's guardianship, the current placement is formally voided as of this date. Madame Amelia Bones is confirmed as temporary magical guardian pending resolution of the legal status review of Sirius Black, at which point his suitability as permanent guardian will be assessed by this panel. She looked at Harry, and it was a brief look, professional, but it held something. Harry Potter is a ward of no person or institution whose authority derives from arrangements made in 1981. He's free to be properly placed. She gathered her papers. This inquiry is closed. The room came apart slowly, the way formal rooms do, not all at once but in a gradual dissolution of the official posture, people turning to each other, voices coming back up to a normal register. The reporters were already moving toward the exit. Shacklebolt put a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder and squeezed once and went to speak to one of the panel members. Harry sat for a moment. He'd known the outcome was likely. Amelia had told him the evidence was strong, Shacklebolt had walked him through the probable findings, he'd understood intellectually what today was going to produce. And still there was something happening in his chest that was larger than intellectual understanding, something that felt like a door opening into a room he'd been standing outside of for a very long time, waiting for someone to tell him it was his to walk into. Amelia sat beside him. She didn't say anything immediately. She was collecting her documents with the same efficiency she brought to everything, but she wasn't in a hurry about it, which was unusual for her. "Are you all right?" she asked, without looking up. "Yes," he said. Then, more accurately, "I think so. It's a lot. That's a reasonable response to it." He looked at the front of the chamber, where Dumbledore was talking quietly to Croaker. He looked older than he usually did, Harry thought, not diminished, exactly, because diminished wasn't a word that worked for Dumbledore, but he looked like a person bearing the weight of a specific thing, and for once the weight was visible. As if he felt Harry's attention, Dumbledore looked up. They looked at each other across the emptying chamber. Harry didn't look away and Dumbledore didn't either, and it wasn't a confrontation, it was something else, something that didn't quite have a name. An acknowledgement, maybe. The specific look between two people who have said all the important things in a public room and now know they'll have to deal with the rest of it somewhere quieter. Then Dumbledore looked away first. He gathered his robes, and he left, and his legal representative walked beside him with the efficient stride of someone already thinking about the next stage, and Harry watched them go. "He'll adapt," Amelia said, still gathering papers. "He always does. He'll recalibrate and find the angle and come back with something that incorporates this outcome into his plan." "I know," Harry said. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it honestly. "Less than it used to." He paused. "He's still the best person to fight Voldemort. He knows more and he's had more time and he does genuinely want to win that fight." He looked at the empty bench. "I just don't want his plan to require me to be the person I was last month. Locked in, underfed, waiting to be needed." "It won't," Amelia said. "Not legally. What he makes of it personally is up to him." She snapped her folder closed and stood. "Come on. Let's go tell Sirius." They told Sirius through Tonks's Patronus relay, a large silver wolf that appeared in the safe house kitchen and spoke with Amelia's voice, clipped and factual. Formal censure issued. Placement voided. Guardianship confirmed to me temporary pending your review. All 9 counts substantiated. Harry was in the ministry corridor when they sent it, standing beside Amelia and Shacklebolt, and he couldn't hear Sirius's response of course, but 30 seconds later his Patronus appeared, a great black dog, obviously, impossibly obvious in retrospect, and it didn't say anything, just stood there in the ministry corridor being very large and very present for about 10 seconds before dissolving, which was the most serious method of expressing something he couldn't put in words. Amelia looked at the space where it had been. Dramatic, she said. Incredibly, Harry agreed. Shacklebolt was smiling, which Harry had not seen him do before and which turned out to be a very warm smile. I'll take you back, he said. Madam Bones, I'll come back for the debrief. An hour, she said. I have the fudge meeting first. She was already turning back toward the lifts, already moving into the next thing, because she was always in the next thing, which was one of the best things about her. Amelia, Harry said. She turned. Thank you. He said it simply. For reading it. All 9 pages. She looked at him for a moment, and it was the same look she'd had in his bedroom at Privet Drive, the evaluating look, but warmer now, the calculation having arrived at something comfortable. Every page, she said. Every single one. She turned and walked away down the corridor, her heels sharp on the ministry floor, her briefcase in one hand, already thinking about fudge. The car ride back to Wiltshire was quiet in the way of after big things, the particular quiet of a space that's been emptied of tension and hasn't filled with anything else yet. Shacklebolt drove with his wand on the dashboard and both hands on the wheel and his face doing something careful and inward. Harry looked out the window at the motorway. Can I ask you something? Harry said. Yes. When this is over, the guardianship transfer, Sirius's review, all the formal stuff, what happens with Dumbledore and me? Like practically. Shacklebolt was quiet for a moment. In terms of the war? In terms of everything. He's the one who knows the most about Voldemort. He's the one who's been planning for this the longest. I'm still going to need, Harry stopped. I don't want to need him. I'm not saying I want to cut him off. I'm saying I want to need him the way I need anyone else. Conditionally. Because he's useful and he's good at certain things, not because he's the only one who decides what I'm allowed to know. Shacklebolt nodded slowly. That's a reasonable thing to want. Is it achievable? A formal censure and a guardianship change means the asymmetry has shifted, Shacklebolt said. You have legal standing now that you didn't have before. Amelia has a position in your life that provides oversight he can no longer circumvent. Sirius, once his status is resolved, gives you someone fighting your corner with equal standing in any room Dumbledore might convene. He glanced at Harry. He can still have opinions about what you should do and when. He just can't enforce them by controlling your living arrangements or sealing files. And the prophecy, Harry said. He'd been carrying this the whole day, waiting for a moment when it fit into the conversation. I know there is one. He's never told me directly, but everything, all of it, points to there being a prophecy about me and Voldemort. And whatever it says, he's been making choices based on it and not telling me. He looked at Shacklebolt. That has to change too. Shacklebolt was quiet for several long seconds. Harry watched the side of his face and waited. I know about the prophecy, Shacklebolt said. I thought you might. It's in the Department of Mysteries. Order members know of its existence. He paused. I can't tell you its contents, I don't know the exact wording. But your instinct that it exists and that Dumbledore's decisions have been shaped by it is correct. Then he needs to tell me. Yes, Shacklebolt said. He does. He turned off the motorway. And I think after today, he knows that. The car pulled down the beach-line drive, and the farmhouse appeared at the end of it, warm-windowed against the late afternoon, and Harry could see a figure in the lit rectangle of the kitchen doorway before they'd even stopped, Sirius, who had apparently been standing at the door since the Patronus. The car stopped and Harry got out and walked up the path, and Sirius grabbed him and hugged him again, same as before, the kind of hug that was really a person making sure something was real, but this time Harry heard him say, quietly and with the rough edge of something held in for a long time, "It's in the record. He can't unseal it." "No," Harry said. "He can't." They stood in the doorway for a moment. Behind Harry, Shacklebolt was gathering his things from the car with the unhurried patience of a man who understood when to give a room. Inside, Tonks had made tea. Obviously, inevitably, there would always be tea at every significant moment. Harry was beginning to accept this as a fixed law of the wizarding world, and the kitchen was warm and smelled like someone had baked something, which turned out to be bread of all things, slightly imperfect, clearly Tonks's work based on the slightly surprised expression she was wearing about its success. Harry sat down. Sirius sat across from him. Tonks put bread on the table and looked at it with cautious pride. Shacklebolt came in a few minutes later and closed the door against the evening. And Harry thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not perfect. Not resolved. Sirius's review was still pending, Voldemort was still out there, Dumbledore was still Dumbledore, and there was an inquiry referral to the full Wizengamot that could go any number of ways. The world was still complicated in all the ways it had always been complicated. But he was sitting at a table with people who were on his side, not because of what he was or what he might be used for, but because of who he was. He had a guardian who had read every page. He had a godfather who had stayed up waiting for a Patronus message. He had a record, a public, permanent, unsealed record, that said what had happened to him and named the person responsible. It wasn't everything. But it was true. And for the first time in a very long time, the truth was in a place where no one could seal it. He ate the imperfect bread. It was, genuinely, delicious. "Tonks," he said. She looked up. "This is really good." She looked at the bread. Looked back at him. Her hair went from pink to a sort of glowing gold, which Harry was beginning to understand was her involuntary pleased color. "I know," she said, with the dignity of someone deciding to be confident about it. "I'm full of surprises." From across the table, Sirius caught Harry's eye, and grinned, the real grin, the one Harry had first seen in a photo of the Marauders, young and fully alive, and Harry grinned back. Outside, the beech trees moved in the evening wind, and the ministry was 8 counts down, and somewhere in a public archive a document was sitting unsealed with Dumbledore's name on every page. Chapter 5, Cracks the Death Eater attack on Diagon Alley happened on a Tuesday. Harry heard about it the way he heard about most things from the outside world now, through Shacklebolt, who arrived at the safe house at 7 in the morning with his robe slightly singed on the left sleeve and his face doing the careful, close thing it did when he was managing information. Harry was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a textbook on defensive transfiguration that he'd asked Amelia to send from Gringotts via the school supply system, because whatever else was happening, 5th year was still coming and he was going to be ready for it. He looked at Shacklebolt's sleeve. "How bad?" Shacklebolt sat down. 3 casualties. 2 Aurors injured, 1 civilian. Borgin and Burke's gutted by fiendfire, they contained it, but half the street needs structural repairs. He poured himself tea from the pot Harry had left on the table. No confirmed Death Eater identifications. They were masked. But it was them. The fiendfire is their signature. And the pattern, a public location, maximum disruption, timed for morning when the street was busy. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Voldemort is making himself visible. Harry looked at his textbook. He'd known this was coming, had felt it coming the way you felt weather, a pressure change in the whole atmosphere of things. 3 weeks since the hearing. Sirius's review was processing, Amelia was working through the formal censure fallout with the Wisengamot, and somewhere in the background the actual reason any of this mattered had been getting on with his own plans. "The Order knows?" Harry asked. "The Order was already mobilizing when I left." "And Dumbledore?" "Dumbledore was at the scene before we were," Shacklebolt said. He said it with the flatness of a man relaying information, not editorializing. He contained the Fiendfire. Harry sat with that for a second. The thing was, and this was the crack at the center of everything, the fault line he'd been stepping around for weeks, Dumbledore in the context of Voldemort was not the same problem as Dumbledore in the context of Harry Potter's guardianship. He was still the most powerful wizard alive. He had still been fighting this war longer than most people had been conscious. When Fiendfire was consuming Diagon Alley at 7 in the morning, the right response was to be glad he showed up. That didn't resolve anything. It just added a layer to everything. Sirius appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd heard enough, his hearing was preternaturally good, which Harry suspected was a remnant of 12 years in Azkaban making silence something you learned to listen through. He looked at Shacklebolt. "Casualties? Manageable. The Aurors will recover." Sirius's jaw moved. He sat down. He'd been doing better with the not doing anything, mostly, though Harry had caught him twice standing at the front window looking out at the beach drive with the specific expression of a caged animal thinking about geometry. He was sleeping more. Eating better. Remus had visited twice through official channels, a thin, tired man who looked at Harry with the careful tenderness of someone who knew they had no claim on him and was trying to be all right about that. "He's showing Fudge he's back," Sirius said. "Voldemort. This isn't about Diagon Alley specifically. This is, look at me, here I am, tell your minister I'm real now." "That's what I think too," Shacklebolt agreed. "Which means Fudge has to respond," Harry said. "Yes. Which means Fudge needs someone to put in front of the public. Someone who confirms the threat is real and that the ministry's handling it." He looked at Shacklebolt. "And the easiest someone is me." Shacklebolt didn't say anything, which was confirmation. "No," Amelia said, from the hallway. None of them had heard her come in. She was still in her outer coat, which meant she'd come directly from the scene, and there was a smudge of something gray on her right hand that was almost certainly structural dust from a rebuilt wall. She came into the kitchen and took off her coat and hung it up and sat down and looked at all of them with the brisk attention of someone who had been thinking at speed for the last 2 hours. "Fudge called me at 6, she said. "He wants Harry at a press conference. Full ministry, full press corps, Harry standing there being a credible witness to Voldemort's return." She poured herself tea. "I told him no. He won't accept that," Sirius said. "He doesn't have to accept it. He just has to live with it." She looked at Harry. "The press conference isn't the problem. Harry confirming Voldemort's return publicly is arguably a good thing for the war effort and for the truth. The problem is Fudge's version of it, which puts Harry under ministry management, gives Fudge the political benefit, and positions Harry as a resource the ministry controls rather than a person who has independent standing." She turned her mug. "That particular configuration is exactly what we've spent the last 3 weeks changing." "So we do a different version," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. "Not a Fudge press conference. Not ministry management." He thought about it. The logic felt clear, the way tactics felt clear when you were reading a Quidditch match and could see the shape of the thing. "I've been silent publicly. That's been useful, it gave you time to build the legal record, it kept the story out of Skeeter's hands long enough for the hearing to happen. But now, if Diagon Alley is Voldemort announcing himself, the question isn't whether Harry Potter confirms it. The question is who's managing that confirmation and on what terms." Amelia was looking at him with the evaluating expression, the one he passed. "What terms would you want?" "My terms," he said. "My statement, in my words, not edited by Fudge or Dumbledore or anyone else." Published directly. Not a press conference, a written statement. He paused. And it says exactly what happened in the graveyard. Not the ministry version, not the cleaned-up version. What I saw. What Cedric, he stopped. Restarted. What happened to Cedric? What Voldemort said. The ritual. All of it. The kitchen was quiet. That's a significant escalation, Shacklebolt said, carefully. Diagon Alley is a significant escalation, Harry said. This is a response. Sirius was watching him with the expression he got when Harry said something that surprised him, the slightly arrested look of a man recalibrating where his godson was in relation to where he'd expected. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, very slightly, to himself. Amelia set down her mug. I'll draft the release framework, she said. You write it. I review it for anything that could compromise active Auror investigations, and only that. Everything else stays as you write it. She looked at him steadily. Are you sure? I'm sure, Harry said. I've been sure for months. I just didn't have anyone to be sure to. The statement took 2 days. Harry wrote it at the kitchen table, which felt right, the same table he'd been eating at, thinking at, learning at for 3 weeks. He wrote it longhand, which was slower and more deliberate than typing would have been if he'd had a typewriter, which he didn't, but the deliberateness mattered. He wanted to feel each sentence. He wrote about the Triwizard Tournament first, the cup that was a portkey, the graveyard, the darkness and the cold and the particular quality of suddenly being somewhere you hadn't chosen to be. He wrote about Cedric in plain language without making it either a eulogy or a report, because it had been both at once. He wrote about Wormtail, about the ritual, about Voldemort's return to his body, the bone, the blood, the ugly specific magic of resurrection, and he wrote it all the way through without stopping, because stopping to manage the feelings would have made the feelings present in the wrong way. Then he wrote about what Voldemort had said to his Death Eaters in that graveyard. The names. The expectations. The clarity of his contempt for the people who'd claimed they'd been under the Imperius curse and his equal clarity that he'd keep accepting them anyway, because power needed instruments and he didn't require sincerity from instruments. He wrote about the duel. About the Priori Incantatem, the echo line between their wands, the figures that appeared in the light. His parents. He wrote about his parents the way he'd never written about them to anyone, because there had never been anyone he could write to who would understand it, and the directness of putting it in a document that would become public felt right, like the only appropriate thing to do with something that big was to refuse to keep it private. He wrote about coming back with the body. About Dumbledore's face when he saw Cedric. About Fudge. He finished it at midnight on the second day, put down his quill, and sat back and looked at it for a long time. Tonks appeared at his elbow with tea. It was always tea, it would always be tea. This was apparently a non-negotiable feature of being around people who cared about you, and sat beside him and read it without asking, because she'd understood by now that the reading was fine, that he didn't actually want to be alone with it. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. The bit about Cedric, she said. About carrying him back. Yeah. That's the truest writing I've ever read, she said. In the sense of, you can tell it came from somewhere real, not from somewhere managed. I wasn't going to manage it, he said. That's the whole point. She nodded. Drink your tea. Amelia read it the next morning and made 4 small notes in the margins. 2 were requests for clarification on Auror-sensitive details, 1 was a correction of a date, and 1 said simply, good. She handed it back without editorial. I'll have it filed and published simultaneously, she said. Simultaneous filing means it's in the public record before anyone can suppress it, and publication means it's in front of the public before anyone can contextualize it away. She paused. This is going to cause a significant reaction. I know. Fudge will claim the ministry was misrepresented. Dumbledore will, she thought. Dumbledore will probably say nothing publicly, which is more complicated than if he objected. Because if he says nothing, people assume he agrees, Harry said. Because if he says nothing, he's allowed it to stand without contesting it, which changes his position relative to everything that happened at the hearing. She gathered the document. He'll come here after it's published. I know. Harry looked at her. I'm ready for that. She looked at him for a moment. He's going to ask to be involved. In whatever comes next. The war effort, specifically. He's going to make the case that the external threat changes the internal situation, that whatever happened in that hearing room, the practical reality of Voldemort requires cooperation. He's right, Harry said. She blinked, fractionally. It was the closest thing to surprise he'd ever seen on her face. He is right, Harry continued. That's the part I've been thinking through. He's the right person to lead the fight against Voldemort. He has the history and the knowledge and the capability. And I'm going to work with him on that. He met her eyes. But on my terms. Not his. And he doesn't get to use the war as a reason to roll back what happened here. Can you hold that line? She asked. When he's standing in front of you, and he's being everything he's good at being, yes, Harry said. Simply, without performance. Because I know something now that I didn't know before. What? That you exist, he said. That there's someone whose job it is to apply the law consistently regardless of who's being evaluated, and that she actually does that job. He paused. That changes how it feels to be in a room with him. I'm not his piece anymore. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, published tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. It came out on a Thursday. By 9, the Prophet's Owls were being overwhelmed by response mail and they'd already rushed a second print edition. By 10, the Wisengamot's administrative office had received 14 formal requests for supplementary inquiry into Fudge's handling of the post-tournament period. By 11, Fudge had issued a statement that was impressively incoherent given that it had presumably been drafted by people who were paid to be coherent, which suggested that the people being paid hadn't had enough time to work with. By noon, Dumbledore's owl arrived at the safe house. Not the tawny owl from 3 weeks ago. A different owl, smaller, faster, the kind used for urgent communication. The letter was brief, which Harry suspected was deliberate, and asked simply whether Harry would be willing to meet, at his convenience, at a time and place of his choosing. Harry read it twice. Handed it to Sirius, who read it without expression. Then handed it to Amelia, who had arrived an hour earlier looking like someone who had been in back-to-back meetings since 8 and intended to have several more before the day ended. At his convenience, she noted. Time and place of his choosing. I noticed that too, Harry said. He's conceding the terms. He's adjusting, Sirius said, with an edge that hadn't entirely dulled. He's recalibrating his angle. Now that the public statement is out and the hearing record is unsealed, the version where he's in control of Harry's information is gone. So he's coming to the version where he's in Harry's confidence. That's not necessarily sinister, Shacklebolt said. No, Sirius agreed. It's just still Dumbledore. Harry picked up the letter again. He thought about what Amelia had said, he'll make the case that the war changes things. He thought about Voldemort in the graveyard and the cold gravel under his knees and the sound of Cedric falling. He thought about Fiendfire in Diagon Alley. He thought about the prophecy that Shacklebolt had confirmed existed and that Dumbledore had been keeping in a glass sphere in the Department of Mysteries instead of telling the person it was about. Here, Harry said. Tomorrow. 4 o'clock. Just him, no legal representative, no order escort. And I want Amelia here. Amelia didn't look up from her documents. I'll be here. Sirius opened his mouth. Harry looked at him. Fine, Sirius said. I'll be in the next room. You'll be in this room, Harry said. Because you're my godfather and you're allowed to be here. But you won't say anything unless I ask you to. Sirius looked at him for a long second. Then, quietly, with something that wasn't quite amusement but was adjacent to it, "When did you get like this?" 3 weeks ago, Harry said. "When someone came to my door and read my letter." Dumbledore arrived at 4 o'clock precisely, which was consistent. He arrived alone, which was notable. He arrived by the front door, knocked, and waited, which Harry found interesting. He could have operated directly to the ward boundary, could have announced himself with magic, could have done any number of things that would have established him as someone exceptional arriving. Instead he knocked on the door like anyone else. Harry opened it himself. For a moment they stood on either side of the threshold. Dumbledore was in grey robes today, which Harry had never seen before, always blue, always purple, the colors of authority and deliberation. Grey was something different. He had his wand in his pocket rather than in hand, and he looked at Harry with the full weight of that extraordinary attention, and this time Harry didn't feel it land the way it used to, didn't feel the slight reorganization of himself under the scrutiny of being seen by something that had been seeing a very long time. He felt it as a look between two people. Just that. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Come in," Harry said. They sat in the front room, which was the most formal of the safe house's spaces, a proper sitting room with good furniture and no particular character, which felt right for this particular conversation. Amelia sat in the chair by the window. Sirius was on the settee, at Harry's right, with the posture of a man performing remarkable stillness. Shacklebolt had chosen to absent himself, which Harry suspected was deliberate and respectful. Dumbledore sat across from Harry, and he took a breath, and he said, "I read your statement." "Everyone read it," Harry said. "Yes." A pause. "It was very honest." "It was accurate," Harry said. "I was just accurate." Dumbledore looked at his hands for a moment, which was something Harry had never seen him do. "What I said at the inquiry," he said. "About not asking because I thought it would worry you." He looked up. "I want you to know that I've sat with that answer since the day I gave it, and I find that it doesn't improve under examination." "No," Harry said. "It doesn't." "I made a calculation," Dumbledore said, and his voice had the same precision as always but without the measured reassurance he usually wrapped it in. Just the sentence, standing alone. "I decided that your comfort and your ignorance were less important than the protection and the plan. I made that calculation without consulting you, about your own life, and I made it dozens of times across 14 years. He held Harry's eyes. "I'm not going to tell you I was entirely wrong, because parts of what I decided were genuinely necessary and I believe you're old enough to understand that. But the aggregation of those decisions, the sum of them, resulted in what was documented in that hearing room. And I have to own that." Harry was quiet for a moment. He'd thought about what he would feel, hearing this. He'd expected to feel something large, vindication, or grief, or anger, or some combination. Instead he felt something quiet and specific, like a very old ache locating itself precisely for the first time. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "Not the letter's reason. The real reason." Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "Because Diagon Alley was the beginning. He's going to move more quickly now and more publicly, and the things I know that are relevant to stopping him, that are relevant to you specifically, I've been holding too long." He paused. "I came to tell you about the prophecy." The room was very still. Sirius made a sound. Harry put a hand up without looking at him, and Sirius went silent, and Harry kept his eyes on Dumbledore. "All of it," Harry said. "All of it," Dumbledore agreed. He recited the prophecy in the quiet safe house sitting room, in the same voice he used for everything, low, measured, unadorned. Harry listened to every word. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other for neither can live while the other survives." It landed exactly as heavily as Harry had known it would. He sat with it for a moment, the weight of it, the specific terrible geometry of neither can live while the other survives, and he breathed through it and he let himself feel it, and then he looked at Dumbledore. How long have you known? Since before you were born. And you didn't tell me because, I told myself it was to protect you. To let you have whatever childhood was possible before the weight of it became necessary. Dumbledore's voice was even. I told myself that for 13 years. I'm not certain, now, how much of that was genuine and how much was a preference for maintaining the conditions that made the plan workable. Harry looked at him. The plan where I didn't know, so I couldn't make choices that complicated it. A long pause. Yes. The room breathed. Outside, wind was moving through the beech trees, the afternoon light coming through the window at the particular angle it got to by 4 o'clock, warm and slightly oblique. I'm going to fight him, Harry said. I'm not doing it because of the prophecy. I'm doing it because Cedric is dead and people are getting hurt and I'm the one who can stop it. But I'm doing it my way, with the information I'm owed, and I'm doing it from a position where my life is actually mine. He met Dumbledore's eyes. That means the guardianship stands. Amelia's authority stands. When Sirius is cleared, he becomes my guardian, and that's permanent. I'll train with you, I'll work with the Order on appropriate operations, I'll take what you know because it's genuinely useful. But you don't make decisions about my life without consulting me. Dumbledore was quiet. Then, with something that was either resignation or something larger than resignation, a kind of settling, that is fair. It's not about fair, Harry said. It's just true. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression. Harry had seen that flicker before, at the hearing, when Marchbanks had asked him why he hadn't consulted Harry about the welfare reports. The same brief crack in the composed surface. The look of a man encountering, for the first time, a version of Harry Potter that had gotten out from under the plan. Yes, Dumbledore said. It is. After Dumbledore left, having spent another 40 minutes going through what he knew about Voldemort's current movements, Harry taking notes with the same textbook at the kitchen table focus he'd brought to everything, Sirius sat in the empty front room for a long time. Harry found him there an hour later, sitting in the chair Dumbledore had occupied, looking at nothing in particular. You held that very well, Sirius said. I just said what was true. I know. That's what I mean. He looked up at Harry. I've known Albus Dumbledore since I was 11 years old. I've seen him in Order meetings in the First War, I've seen him face Voldemort directly. I've never seen someone sit across from him and set the terms. He paused. I've seen him set the terms and make other people feel like they'd chosen them. That's different. Harry sat in the chair across from him. I've had a teacher for 4 years who was very good at that. At some point you start to see the structure of it. When did you decide what you were going to say? Yesterday. When I finished the statement. He looked at his hands. Writing it down, the graveyard, all of it, I had to be really honest about what I know and what I don't know. And one of the things I know is that Voldemort has to be stopped and Dumbledore is the best asset we have for that. And one of the things I don't know is whether I can do it without him. He paused. But I know I can do it without being his chess piece. Those are different things. Yes, Sirius said. They are. Tonks appeared in the doorway. She looked between them with the perceptive attention she generally tried to disguise as casual. He's gone. Gone, Harry confirmed. How was it? Good, Harry said. I think. He considered. He told me the prophecy. Tonks went very still. All of it? All of it. She looked at him for a moment. How are you? Fine, he said. Then, more accurately, not fine. But, okay. I knew it was there. Knowing the words is better than not knowing. He looked at the window, the beech trees in the late afternoon. It says the power the Dark Lord knows not. He's got more magic than me and more experience and more everything. Whatever that power is, it's not the technical kind. No, Sirius said quietly. It's not. So I need to figure out what it is. Harry sat back. Which is something I can actually work on, instead of waiting in a room for someone to tell me what to do next. Tonks made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh but was full of affection. You're going to be absolutely terrible and brilliant at 5th year, she said. The knock at the door came at 7 that evening, which was unexpected because the safe house wasn't supposed to receive unannounced visitors. Shacklebolt was at the door before anyone else moved, his wand out with the speed of a man who had excellent reflexes and took them seriously. Harry was behind him in the hallway, which was where he'd ended up when the knock had come, not because he was protecting anyone, just because being in corridors during unexpected things had become a kind of reflex. "It's me," said a voice from outside. "Remus." "The wards." It's not responding to the standard counter. Shacklebolt lowered his wand fractionally and looked at Amelia, who had emerged from the kitchen. She looked at Harry, who shrugged in a way that meant your call. She waved a hand and the ward peeled back just enough to admit one person. Remus Lupin came in looking worse than the last time Harry had seen him, thinner, which hadn't seemed possible, and with the particular pallor of someone who had not been sleeping. He had a copy of the Prophet in his hand, folded to an inside page, and he looked at Harry first, as he always did when he came in, with that expression of careful tenderness. "There's been another one," he said. He handed Amelia the paper. Kent. Ministry-affiliated family. 3 people injured, 1 critically. He looked around the room. They're moving fast. Amelia read the article with the speed of someone used to processing information quickly. Her expression didn't change, but Harry watched her hands and her left hand had gone slightly tighter on the paper. "When?" "This afternoon." "Around the time," Remus glanced at Harry. "Around the time you were meeting with Dumbledore, as it happens." "Deliberate timing," Sirius said, from the hallway. He'd appeared silently, which was an impressive skill for a man his size. "Possibly." Remus looked at his friend. "Possibly just escalation having its own momentum." He ran a hand through his hair. "The order is stretched. We don't have enough people watching enough locations. And Dumbledore's attention was here, his attention was here because I asked him here," Harry said. "So that's my fault." "It's Voldemort's fault," Amelia said, without looking up from the paper. She set it down on the hall table. "The causal responsibility for a Death Eater attack lies with the people conducting it, not with anyone who happened to be in a meeting." She looked at Harry. "Don't." He nodded. "What do you need, Remus?" she asked. Remus looked slightly surprised at the direct question. "I came to brief Harry, mostly. And to see." He looked at Sirius again, and the look between them had the whole history of a very long friendship in it, all the complicated years of it. "How things stood." "Have dinner," Amelia said. "Tonks, is there enough?" "There's always enough," Tonks called from the kitchen. "I made soup. Actual soup. With things in it." They went to the kitchen, all of them, and it was a full table, Harry and Sirius and Remus and Amelia and Tonks and Shacklebolt, and the conversation was layered in the way of a meal that has serious content and also people in it who are genuinely glad to be in the same room, and the soup turned out to be excellent in a way that surprised Tonks again, as if each successful meal was a new data point she was still processing. Remus told them what the Order knew, which wasn't much but was more than nothing. Shacklebolt added what the Auror office knew, which was slightly more structured. Amelia asked 3 specific questions that reoriented the conversation twice. Sirius was quiet in the way he got when he was genuinely thinking rather than reacting, which was a version of him Harry had been learning to read. And Harry listened, and ate, and thought about the prophecy, the power the Dark Lord knows not, and looked around the table at the room of people who had, for a variety of different reasons in a variety of different ways, decided to be on his side. He thought, maybe this is it. Not the magical kind of power, not the technical kind, not the kind that lived in a wand or a spell or a strategy. Maybe the thing Voldemort didn't know was what it felt like to sit at a table with people who actually wanted you there. Not what you represented. Not what you might be used for. Just you. Voldemort had people who feared him and people who served him and people who were loyal to his vision, and all of those relationships had the same shape, the shape of someone positioned relative to power. He had never, as far as Harry could tell, had anyone who just wanted to be at the same table. Harry looked at the soup. At the slightly imperfect bread Tonks had made 2 days ago and which there were still half a dozen pieces of because no one had been willing to finish it. At Sirius, who was arguing something with Remus in the specific way of people who had been arguing the same things for decades and found it comfortable. At Amelia, who was making a note on a small pad she kept beside her plate because she was constitutionally incapable of letting a useful thought escape. He thought, I know what it is. He was still thinking about it an hour later, sitting on the back garden step in the dark, when Amelia came out and stood beside him. You're doing the thinking thing again, she said. Tonks calls it the faraway thing. Tonks isn't wrong. She sat down on the step, which was unlike her. She usually stood at things, held a position rather than settled into one. The attack in Kent concerns me. Me too. He's testing response times. The orders, the Aurors. He wants to know how fast we can cover multiple locations. She looked out at the dark garden. Which means he's planning something that requires our coverage to be inadequate. What do you need? She looked at him. I need more Aurors than I have, and I need them better coordinated with the Order than they currently are, which requires Fudge to accept that the Order is a legitimate operation, which he won't do because accepting that requires accepting that Dumbledore was right about Voldemort being back, which requires accepting that he spent a year wrong about it publicly. She paused. So I'm working around him. How? Carefully. A small pause. I have 8 Aurors I trust completely. I've been quietly restructuring their assignments to allow for faster response. I've established a direct communication line with Dumbledore that doesn't go through Fudge's office. She looked at her hands. And I'm building a case for Fudge's removal from office, which will take time I'm not sure we have. Harry looked at her. You're trying to fix the whole system. I'm trying to fix the parts one can reach, she said. The parts one can reach are the ones within my legal authority. I move quickly within those and I don't wait for permission to do what I'm authorized to do. She glanced at him. Which is a principle I think you've also been operating on, lately. He thought about the letter, and Hedwig, and the Muggle post box in Surrey. Yeah, he said. I think so. They sat in the dark garden together for a moment, with the house warm behind them and the beech trees doing their restless nighttime moving. The review for Sirius, Harry said. Timeline. My best estimate is 10 days. Possibly less if the lead examiner moves quickly, and I've indicated to the examiner's office that fast resolution is preferred. She paused. Once it's done, he becomes your formal guardian. Permanent, legal, unsealed. She paused again. How do you feel about that? Harry thought about Sirius, who sat on floors and made eggs and held on too tightly when he hugged you because he was making up for lost time and knew it. Who had 12 years of Azkaban behind him and was trying to build something on the other side of them. Who was excessive and sometimes wrong and occasionally required management, and who looked at Harry with an intensity that was equal parts guilt and love and the determination to do something useful with whatever time was left. Good, he said. I feel good about it. Amelia nodded. She stood, which was her natural resting position, and looked down at him. Inside. It's getting cold. In a minute. She went in. He stayed for a moment, looking at the sky, no stars tonight, clouds moving over them, the particular dark of a summer night with weather in it. He thought about the prophecy and the power that Voldemort didn't know. He thought about the cracks, in the Ministry's position, in Fudge's denial, in Dumbledore's careful construction, in Voldemort's assumption that opposition would be fragmented and manageable. Some of those cracks he'd made himself. Some had been made for him, by a woman with a legal pad and a warrant. Some were just the cracks that things developed when you pushed on them honestly. He went inside. The kitchen was still full of people and noise and the remains of Tonks's soup, and it was warm, and Harry sat down and joined the argument Sirius and Remus were having about something that had apparently happened in 1979, and for one whole evening he was just a person at a table. Chapter 6. His own Sirius's legal status review came back on a Wednesday morning, 9 days after Dumbledore's visit, in the form of a ministry owl that arrived at breakfast and dropped an envelope in the middle of the table between the marmalade and Shacklebolt's case notes. Nobody touched it for a second. Then Sirius picked it up, looked at it, and put it down again. "Someone else open it," he said. "You open it," Harry said. "I can't." He pushed it toward Harry. "I genuinely cannot. I've waited 12 years, I've been waiting 9 days, and now I can't open it." He looked, in this moment, not like a man who had faced Azkaban and survived it and come out the other side, but like someone who had learned to live with a specific hope at a careful distance and was now afraid to close the gap. Harry picked up the envelope and opened it and read it. He looked up. "Sirius Orain Black," he said, "is hereby confirmed as a free wizard, all charges vacated, conviction formally expunged from the ministry record, pending full restitution of legal rights and formal." He stopped and looked at Sirius. "You're free." Sirius sat very still. Tonks made a sound. Shacklebolt closed his case notes, which was the most emphatic gesture Harry had ever seen him make. Then Sirius laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that had a lot of years in it, not just the 12 in Azkaban but the years before, the boy who'd run away from his family at 16, the young man who'd lost everyone in a single night. It was a laugh that came from a deep place and filled the kitchen with a quality of sound that the safe house's functional beige walls had never been intended to hold. Harry was grinning. He hadn't decided to grin, it just happened, the same way you didn't decide to inhale after being underwater. It was just what the body did when something it had been waiting for finally arrived. Tonks was crying, which she appeared to find both appropriate and deeply annoying, pressing the back of her hand to her eyes with the expression of someone who did not consider themselves a crier. Remus, who had stayed the night in the spare room, appeared in the kitchen doorway at the sound of the laugh. He took one look at the table and his face did something that Harry thought might have been the most genuinely happy he'd ever seen on it. He crossed the kitchen and put his hand on Sirius's shoulder and that was all, no words, just the hand, which was the right call. Amelia came down the stairs at 7:45 and stood in the kitchen doorway and surveyed the room. Sirius was still laughing, slightly, in the way of someone who had used most of their laugh and was working through the remainder. Tonks had gotten herself under control and was drinking tea with unnecessary intensity. Shacklebolt was looking at his case notes again, which were upside down. "It came," Amelia said. "It came," Harry confirmed. She looked at Sirius. Something moved in her expression, not warmth, because warmth wasn't quite her register, but the particular expression of someone who has worked very hard toward a specific outcome and is now looking at that outcome happening in her kitchen. "Welcome to legal existence, Mr. Black." Sirius looked at her. Sirius, then. She moved to the kettle. "There's paperwork." "Obviously," he said. "There's always paperwork. You'll want a solicitor for the restitution claim. 12 years of wrongful imprisonment under the ministry's jurisdiction, that's a significant sum. I can recommend, Amelia." He looked at her with the direct, serious look he got when he was being completely unironic. "Thank you." She held his gaze for a moment. "The law worked," she said. "That's what it's supposed to do." "Yes, but you're the reason it did." She set down the kettle and looked at him steadily. "The law protecting people isn't a favor I'm doing anyone. It's the minimum standard of what this system should be." She paused. "I'm glad it happened. But it should have happened 12 years ago." She turned back to the kettle and left that in the room, and it sat there with the particular weight of a truth that didn't need comment. The guardianship transfer happened 4 days later. It was a simple ceremony in legal terms. A Wisengamot registrar came to the safe house with a standard form and 2 witness lines and a magical seal, and Amelia relinquished her temporary status and Sirius took permanent guardianship, and Harry signed his name on the line that said ward, and the form was filed and it was done. In practice it was slightly less simple, because Sirius had insisted on marking the occasion, and marking the occasion for Sirius involved cooking an enormous breakfast, the full range of it, everything available, eggs in 3 different preparations and toast and actual orange juice and something involving mushrooms that he was very proud of, and eating it at the kitchen table with everyone present, which included Remus and Shacklebolt and Tonks and Amelia and the Hogwarts letter that had arrived the day before, confirming Harry's place in 5th year. The letter had included his school supply list, his Hogsmeade permission form, and a small note in Professor McGonagall's handwriting that said, "We look forward to seeing you at the start of term, Potter. Get some rest." It was the most McGonagall sentence Harry had ever read. He sat at the full table and looked at the letter beside his plate and felt the particular sensation of 2 timelines existing simultaneously, the one where he was going back to Hogwarts, which was September and classes and Quidditch and the ordinary machinery of school, and the one where the war was real and Voldemort was moving and none of the larger things had resolved. Both were true. That was, he'd come to understand, the situation. It was always going to be both. "You're doing the thinking thing," Sirius said, putting a plate in front of him. "I'm allowed to think." "Not at breakfast." He sat down. "Eat. Think later." Harry ate. The eggs were, genuinely, excellent. Sirius cooked with the enthusiasm of someone who'd spent too long eating prison food and intended to compensate aggressively. The table was loud with overlapping conversations and Tonks arguing with Remus about something she'd read in the Prophet and Shacklebolt and Amelia having a quiet, technical exchange about Auror deployment that Harry tracked with half his attention because it was useful. This, he thought. This was what the letter had been reaching toward, 9 pages of flat and factual accounting sent through a Muggle post box in Surrey by a boy who had stopped being willing to absorb damage quietly. Not this specific breakfast, not this exact arrangement of people, but the underlying thing, the right to be at a table like a person and not behind a door like an inconvenience. He looked at Sirius, who was arguing cheerfully with Remus about something that had apparently been a running debate since 1978, and thought, there it is. The power the Dark Lord doesn't know. Not a spell and not a strategy. Just this. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. He filed it away in the place where things went when they were real enough to keep. Dumbledore came back a week before the start of term. He came by Owl this time, asking again. Harry wrote back the same day and said yes, same place, same time. He told Amelia, who arrived with her briefcase and her coat and her legal pad, and Sirius, who had now moved into the safe house on a more permanent basis and occupied the largest bedroom with an enthusiasm that suggested he planned to compensate for 12 years of cell floors. Dumbledore came through the door differently this time. Still punctual, still composed, but the grey robes again, and something had shifted in the quality of his composure. It was less constructed, less the careful product of decades of habit. He sat across from Harry and he looked like a man who had been thinking since the last time they'd met and had arrived at something he didn't entirely like and intended to say it anyway. "I've been in the Department of Mysteries," he said. Harry looked at him. "I retrieved the prophecy orb." He set it on the coffee table between them, a small glass sphere with a faint interior luminescence. "You should have this. It should be yours, you're one of the 2 people to whom it refers, and keeping it at the Ministry serves no purpose except to give Voldemort a reason to attempt to access it." He looked at Harry steadily. "He knows it exists. He will try to get it. If it's here, under wards you can trust, it's harder to reach." Harry looked at the sphere. It pulsed very slightly, like something breathing. "There's another reason," Dumbledore said, and his voice was careful in the specific way of someone saying something they've rehearsed and still find difficult. "I've been keeping things at the ministry, including this, as a form of control. Keeping the information in a place only I could easily access meant the information remained, in practice, mine." He paused. "I'd like to stop doing that, where I can." Amelia, from the window chair, was writing on her legal pad, which Harry found clarifying. The presence of someone writing things down had a focusing effect on the quality of what people said. "What else?" Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "I have information about Voldemort's Horcruxes, objects in which he has stored pieces of his soul, making him functionally immortal until they're destroyed. I've been researching them for years." He reached into his robes and produced a folder, actual paper, not parchment, which was somehow striking. "This is everything I have. Every confirmed Horcrux, every suspected one, every theory about their nature and destruction." He held it out. "You should have it." Harry took the folder. He opened it. The first page was a diagram of a locket, annotated in Dumbledore's precise handwriting, with notes on suspected history and current location. He turned to the second page. A diary, the diary, Tom Riddle's diary from second year, with a note that said, "Destroyed by Harry Potter, Chamber of Secrets, Basilisk Fong, 1993. One confirmed." Harry looked up. "You knew it was a Horcrux? In second year?" "I suspected, at the time. I confirmed my theory subsequently." Dumbledore held his gaze. "I should have told you then. Or in third year, when you were old enough to understand the implications. Or, at any point across the 4 years since." His voice didn't shift in register. "I didn't, because I was working on the assumption that the less you knew, the safer you were. That assumption was wrong in almost every case I applied it to." The room was quiet. Harry looked at the folder. "The Horcruxes," he said. "How many?" 6 made. 1 destroyed. Possibly 5 remaining." Dumbledore looked at his hands. "And one that I have suspected for some time but have not confirmed, because confirming it," he stopped, "would require information I've been reluctant to share." Harry looked at him. "Tell me." Dumbledore met his eyes. "The night he killed your parents, when the killing curse rebounded, it should have killed him. It didn't kill him. It reduced him. And the reason it reduced him rather than destroyed him was the Horcruxes, they anchored him." He paused. "But the rebounding curse had to go somewhere. It went into the nearest living vessel." He looked at Harry's forehead, at the scar. "I believe, Harry, that you are an unintentional Horcrux. That when the curse hit you as an infant, it split a piece of his soul and that piece attached to you." The room was very still. Harry sat with it. He'd known something was different about him and Voldemort, had always known it, the connection, the shared pain, the way Voldemort's emotion sometimes found him in sleep. He'd never put a name to it. Now someone was putting a name to it. Sirius, from the settee, had gone completely silent. The particular silence of a man doing something very difficult with something he'd just heard. "If that's true," Harry said, and his voice was steady, which surprised him and then didn't, "then there are 7 Horcruxes, not 6. And destroying them all requires destroying that one too." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Which requires killing me. Or," Dumbledore paused. "Or Voldemort doing it himself. The piece of his soul that's in you can only be separated from you in one specific way. If Voldemort uses the killing curse on you, the soul piece is destroyed, and if your own soul is sufficiently anchored, protected," he stopped. "There's a theoretical possibility that you survive it. It's not a certainty. It's a theory." "A theory," Harry repeated. "Yes." Harry looked at the prophecy sphere on the coffee table. He looked at the folder in his hands. He looked at Dumbledore, who was watching him with the expression of a man who had been carrying something for years and had just put it down on someone else's floor and was watching them decide what to do with it. "Okay," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. It was the smallest possible blink, but it was genuine. "Okay? I mean, it's a lot. Obviously it's a lot. But," Harry turned the folder in his hands. "I'd rather know. I always would have rather known." He looked at Amelia, who had put down her pen and was watching him. "This is what I mean about it being different now. 3 months ago, if he'd told me this, I'd have had no one to, I'd have had to carry it alone. With no legal standing, no guardian, no," he paused. "No table to bring it to." He looked back at Dumbledore. "Now I have people. Which changes the arithmetic." Dumbledore was very quiet. "I'm not going to walk into a killing curse on the off chance it works," Harry continued. "I'm going to destroy the other Horcruxes first, the ones we know about, the ones in this folder. I'm going to train properly, I'm going to work with the Order, I'm going to be prepared. And when the time comes, I'll deal with the last part then." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "But on my terms, with my people, knowing what I know." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "That's, yes. And you tell me everything else," Harry said. "Going forward. No more sealed files. No more I thought it would worry you. If you know something that's relevant to me or to this war, you tell me." A long pause. "Agreed." Amelia put her pen down on her legal pad with a small, decisive click. Everyone looked at her. She looked at Dumbledore. "I want that in writing," she said. "Not because I think you'll renege on it. Because it should be in the record." Dumbledore looked at her. Then, with something that was unmistakably the ghost of a smile, "You're very good at this." "I know," she said. "Draft it before you leave." He drafted it before he left. 2 paragraphs, precise, signed by Dumbledore and witnessed by Amelia and filed with the Ministry's permanent record the same afternoon. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who delivered the filing personally, reported back that the clerk who processed it had read it twice before stamping it, which Harry thought was reasonable. After Dumbledore left, properly this time, with something that felt like an actual resolution rather than a recalibration, the house was quiet in the specific way of after significant things. Harry was in the garden. This was where he'd ended up during every significant processing period, which had led Sirius to refer to the back garden as Harry's thinking bench even though it was just a step, and which had led Tonks to keep checking the kitchen window, which Harry could see from outside and found quietly touching. The beech trees were doing their late summer thing, the leaves on the turn now, just the beginning, the first suggestion of yellow in the uppermost branches. August nearly over. September close. Sirius appeared and sat beside him on the step. He didn't say anything for a while, which was its own kind of development. Sirius at the start of all this would have been talking, filling the space. This Sirius had been learning, over 4 weeks, that sometimes the best thing to offer was just being present. "The Horcrux thing," Harry said. "Yeah. I need you to not do the thing where you try to fix it." "I wasn't," Sirius stopped. Breathed. "I was absolutely going to do that thing." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not going to do it. I'm just sitting with it." A pause. "Harry. A piece of his soul, I know. In you, I know. Since you were Sirius." He went quiet. "I've had something wrong with me, something connected to him, since the night I got this." Harry touched the scar lightly, the way he did sometimes without thinking about it. "It's not new information, in that sense. It's just a name for something I already knew was there." He looked at the trees. "And now I know what to do about it, eventually. Which is better than not knowing." "The theory," Sirius said. "That you might survive it." "Might. That's not," he stopped himself again with visible effort. I am going to find out everything there is to know about that theoretical possibility. I'm going to read every book. I'm going to find anyone who knows anything about the mechanics of it. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that was built over something large. Because might is not good enough. I will make might into will if I have to take apart every library in Britain. Harry looked at him sideways. Can't stop you from doing that. No, Sirius said. You can't. They sat together for a moment. Harry thought about the piece of Voldemort's soul, thought about it the way he'd been thinking about everything lately, which was directly and without flinching, because flinching was what you did when you weren't allowed to look at something, and he was done not being allowed to look at things. It was in him. Had been in him since that night in Godric's Hollow. And in all that time, alongside it, had been everything else that was in him, every choice he'd made, every person he'd cared about, every time he'd run towards something dangerous because someone he loved was in danger, every moment of stubbornness and humor and the particular fierce loyalty that apparently ran in the Potter line and showed no signs of stopping. All of that had been there too. The piece of Voldemort had been in the same place as all of that and it had never touched any of it. He thought that was probably significant. I'm okay, he said to Sirius. Actually. Not managing okay or performing okay. Actually okay. Sirius looked at him. Yeah. Yeah. He looked at the turning trees. I know who I am now. I know what I have. That's different from how I started this summer. He paused. I started this summer in a bedroom in Surrey with 9 pages and a quill and absolutely no idea if anyone would care. He looked at Sirius. And now I have this. All of this. And it turns out having this changes what the rest of it feels like. Sirius was quiet. Then, roughly, yeah. It does. The last dinner at the safe house was the night before the start of term. Amelia had made the decision to keep them at the Wiltshire property through the summer rather than move to Grimmauld Place, which Sirius was technically cleared to return to but which Amelia had evaluated and deemed insufficiently secure for the active threat period. Grimmauld Place would come later, after the start of term, once the Order had properly cleaned and rewarded it, once Sirius had been given the time to deal with it at his own pace rather than being moved there as a logistical solution. The last dinner was full. Everyone came, Shacklebolt and Tonks and Remus and 2 of the Aurors who'd been rotating through, a woman named Dawlish whose manner had softened over 4 weeks from professional distance to something almost avuncular, and Hestia Jones who'd done the original property inventory at Privet Drive and who had, Harry had learned, a gift for very dry humor that came out exactly when you weren't expecting it. Tonks and Sirius had cooked together, which had been predictably chaotic and resulted in a spread of extraordinary abundance that appeared to have no particular theme beyond enthusiasm. There was pasta and there was roast chicken and there was something involving lentils that Remus had made quietly in the corner while everyone else was being chaotic, which turned out to be the best thing on the table. Harry sat at the center of it, and he looked around the table, and he thought, remember this. Not in the sentimental way, not as something to hold onto against the dark, but in the way of noting something that was genuinely true. This table, these people, this particular configuration of adults who had for a variety of reasons decided that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the convenient thing. Remember this is real. After dinner Amelia found him by the kitchen window, washing up with the slightly meditative focus he'd developed as a survival skill at Privet Drive and had found he actually liked. She stood beside him and picked up a dish and dried it, which he hadn't expected. Term starts tomorrow, she said. Yes. Sirius has the FLU connection to his solicitor's office. You can contact me through him in any non-emergency, and directly in an emergency, I'm giving you my personal communication stone. She set down the dried dish and picked up another. Shacklebolt will be embedded with the Order for the foreseeable. Tonks has been assigned to Hogwarts perimeter rotation. She's going to hate that, Harry said. She's going to be very useful, Amelia said. And she's going to protest the whole time and do an excellent job. She dried the dish. I want you to promise me something. What? If something happens at school, anything that feels wrong, anything that seems like a pressure to go back to the way things were, you tell me. Not after, not when it's resolved. When it's happening. She set the dish down and looked at him. You're going back into an environment where Dumbledore has significant institutional authority and where the other adults in positions of power over you don't know what's changed this summer. McGonagall knows me pretty well, Harry said. McGonagall is loyal to Dumbledore. She's loyal to students first, Harry said. He thought about 4 years of Minerva McGonagall, her furious protectiveness, her absolute refusal to let anyone be treated unfairly in front of her. She's not going to, she won't let anything happen to me that she sees. Amelia considered this. All right. But the promise stands. I promise, he said. She picked up the last dish. There's something I want to say, she said. And I'm going to say it once and then we're not going to make a thing of it. He looked at her. You wrote the best letter I've ever received in 15 years of running that department, she said. Not because of the content, although the content was legally significant and carefully documented and that mattered. But because you sent it at all. Because you decided that what was happening to you was worth putting in writing and sending to a stranger. She dried the dish. A lot of people never do that. A lot of people absorb the damage and decide it's not worth the effort or the hope. You didn't. She set the dish down. That was the right decision. I want you to know that. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the soapy water in the sink. I almost didn't send it, he said. I wrote it and then I sat there for about an hour with the sealed envelope, talking myself out of it. What changed your mind? He thought about it. About the kitchen at Privet Drive, the thin slice of toast on the counter, Uncle Vernon's newspaper, the particular quality of being in a house full of people and completely alone in it. He thought about Cedric's face in the torchlight of the graveyard and the long ride back to Hogwarts with the body. I decided I'd rather be disappointed again than find out I'd been wrong about no one caring, he said. And I figured even if you just filed it and forgot it, at least it was somewhere. At least it existed outside of me. Amelia looked at him. It existed, she said. Every page. She put the last dish away and dried her hands and left the kitchen, and Harry stood at the window for a moment looking at the dark garden and the beech trees. He was up at 6 the next morning, which was a habit that Privet Drive had given him and which turned out to have uses. He had an hour alone with the quiet house and the turning beech trees and 2 cups of tea before anyone else appeared. He sat with his Hogwarts letter, rereading the supply list the way you reread things when they represent something larger than themselves. Potions, ingredients and new robes and standard book of spells, grade 5, which he'd already ordered and read the first 4 chapters of because there was nothing to do at night and he'd missed books. He thought about the castle, about the particular way it smelled in September, the combination of old stone and the great halls cooking and the lake and something that was just Hogwarts, unmistakable. He thought about the coming year. 5th year, OWL's, defense against the dark arts with whoever Dumbledore had found, and this year Harry was going to actually push in defense, was going to work at it seriously rather than surviving the gaps left by bad teachers, because the gap between what he knew and what he needed to know was something he'd assessed clearly and intended to close. He thought about Voldemort, the Horcruxes in the folder upstairs, the locations Dumbledore had annotated, the research that needed doing, the pieces that needed destroying. He thought about the soul piece in his scar. He thought about Sirius in the next room, probably awake, probably also thinking. He thought about Amelia's warrant and 9 Aurors on Privet Drive and the blank form with Dumbledore's signature and the letter that had existed outside of him and changed things. He thought, I'm not afraid. Not of Voldemort, specifically, he'd learned to be usefully cautious about Voldemort without being paralyzed by it. Not of the year ahead. Not of the prophecy. Not of Dumbledore or Fudge or whatever new teacher was waiting in the defense classroom or the Wisengamot supplementary proceedings or any of the complicated, ongoing, unresolved things that were still in motion. He was 15 years old and he had a godfather who was free and a guardian who kept the record straight and a folder full of information he'd been owed for years. He had people who wanted him at their table. He had a prophecy that said he had a power that the most dangerous dark wizard in living memory didn't understand, and he was starting to understand what it was. He was not afraid. Sirius appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:30, hair extraordinary, wearing robes that he'd clearly grabbed off the floor, looking at Harry with the expression of someone who had also been awake for a while. He said nothing, just moved to the kettle, and Harry watched him make tea with the slightly imprecise movements of someone not fully alert yet, and thought about how ordinary it was, how completely, beautifully ordinary. "You're not going to tell me to eat breakfast, are you?" Harry said. "I was absolutely going to tell you to eat breakfast," Sirius said. "I'm just working up to it." He set a mug down in front of Harry. "Eat breakfast. We haven't made anything yet. We'll fix that in a minute." He sat down across from Harry. "How are you?" Harry thought about it honestly, the way he'd been doing everything lately. "Ready," he said. Sirius looked at him. Took a sip of tea. "Yeah," he said. "You are." They left for King's Cross at 9:30. The ministry car had come, 2 of them, actually, a fact that Amelia had arranged without comment, because there was more luggage now and more people, Sirius and Remus both coming to the platform, Tonks arriving independently and appearing at the platform barrier already in Muggle clothing with her hair an aggressive shade of purple that she appeared to have chosen as a statement. Platform 9 3/4 was exactly what it always was, the scarlet steam engine, the crowds and the chaos, the particular compressed energy of a world about to tip from summer into something. Harry pushed his trolley through the barrier and stood on the platform and breathed it in, the steam and the coal and the noise of it, and felt the same thing he'd felt every September, the click of rightness that came from arriving at a place you belonged. Families moved around him. Owls and cats and frogs in cages. First years looking alarmed. Fifth years looking lordly. Somewhere ahead Ron and Hermione would be somewhere. He hadn't told them what had happened, not yet, not the whole of it, because that was a conversation for the train when he had time to do it properly. He turned. Sirius was standing just back from the platform crowd, Remus beside him, and they were both looking at Harry with expressions that were doing multiple things at once. Sirius had the intense, present attention that Harry was used to from him, but it was different now from how it had been, less desperate, less guilty, more like someone who had found their footing and was standing in it. Remus was tired, as always, but there was something easier in him too. "Go on," Sirius said. "You've got a train to catch." Harry looked at him. "I'll write." "You better." A pause. "Not Hedwig, though. She attracts attention." I'll get you a boring owl." "You're getting me a boring owl?" "A strategically unremarkable owl," Sirius said. "For operational security." Remus covered something with his hand that might have been a smile. Harry looked between them. He thought about everything, the cupboard and the blank forms and the 9 pages and Amelia's legal pad and the hearing and the prophecy and the folder upstairs in Wiltshire that he'd packed in his trunk. He thought about what the summer had been and what it had changed and what was still ahead. Then he looked at Sirius. "Thank you," he said. "For all the eggs. And the sitting on floors." He paused. "And the rest of it." Sirius looked at him for a moment. "Yeah," he said, roughly. "Always." Harry turned and pushed his trolley toward the train, and the crowd moved around him, and the steam rose and the whistle went and the whole ordinary extraordinary machinery of his world was operating as it always had, and he was moving through it differently. Not because the world had changed, exactly, though some of it had. But because he was moving through it as himself. Fully. Without the editing, without the management, without the performance of being small enough to be acceptable. He found a compartment. Loaded his trunk. Settled Hedwig's cage on the overhead rack and she looked at him with her round amber approval. He sat down and looked out the window at the platform, where Sirius was still visible, and Remus, and Tonks doing something to her hair because a small child had apparently asked about it, and somewhere in a ministry building on the embankment, Amelia Bones was at her desk with her legal pad and her cases, doing what the law was for. The train began to move. The platform slid past, and Sirius raised a hand, and Harry raised one back, and then the station was behind them and the city was falling away and the train was doing what it always did, finding its rhythm on the tracks, carrying everyone northward. The compartment door slid open. Hermione appeared first, Ron a step behind her, both with the specific energy of people who had been waiting to see someone and had important things to say about it. "Harry," Hermione said. "I read your statement in the Prophet. We need to talk about all of it, everything, because Mum was absolutely, and the hearing, we read about the hearing and Ron's dad said that at the ministry people were." "Hi," Harry said. She stopped. Looked at him. The way she looked at things, the close, cataloging look that missed very little. Something shifted in her expression, a quick recalibration. "You look different," she said. Ron, behind her, was doing the same assessment with less vocabulary. "Yeah," he said. "You do." Harry looked at them, his two best friends, who had been sympathetic and kind and limited by having no power to do anything, and who were here now on this train where the summer's events were going to need explaining from the beginning, and who were looking at him with the particular concern of people who cared. "I'm good," he said. And then, because it was the most honest version of the most important thing, actually good. Not managing good. "I'll tell you everything. Sit down." They sat. The train moved north. The English countryside went past in the particular green and gold of a September morning, and Harry told them everything, not the careful edited version, not the version with the important feelings managed out of it, but the actual version. All of it. 9 pages and 9 Aurors and 9 counts and the blank forms and the hearing and the prophecy and all the rest. He told it the way he'd written the letter. Factual. Specific. True. The compartment was quiet by the end of it. Hermione had stopped trying to take notes, which she'd started doing automatically and then stopped when the content became something that wasn't about information. Ron was looking out the window with the expression of someone processing something that had rearranged a wall. Then Hermione said, quietly, "I didn't know. About the cupboard, I mean, I knew something was wrong there. You never talked about going home and the way you ate in first year. Should have. You couldn't have done anything," Harry said. "That's not me being kind. It's true. The person who could do something was Amelia Bones, and she did it, and now it's done." A pause. "Are you angry?" Ron asked. Not confrontationally, just asking. Harry thought about it. "Not in the burning way," he said. "It's more like, I spent a long time being angry underneath things, without anywhere to put it. Now it's been put somewhere. The record has it." He looked at his hands. "That's better than I expected it to feel." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to be okay," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," he said. "I am." The train went on. Hogwarts was ahead of them, and the year was ahead of them, and all the complicated things that the year would contain, classes and OWLs and Quidditch and defense and Horcruxes in a folder in his trunk and a prophecy in a glass sphere and a war that was moving and a system that was slowly, imperfectly, stubbornly trying to do what it was for. Harry Potter looked out the window at the passing country and breathed steadily and felt, for the first time in memory, that his life was actually his. Not perfect. Not resolved. Not safe in the easy, uncomplicated way of a story that had finished. But his. Fully, finally, undeniably his own.